if you give me a second, we'll get Zoom going and then we will. For the Select Committee, Capital Financing and Investments, November 7th, Senator Driscoll.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Nethercott.
Here.
Representative Hallinan.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Here.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Obermuller.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Vice Chairman Nicholas.
Here,
Chairman Perkins.
excused. And he will be joining intermittently. He's coming back from Salt Lake City for a hospital doctor's appointment.
All right, thank you.
So he'll be trying to call on phone, so just be aware of him. Okay? Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, one other thing before we get started. I do know that the tech staff have been in this room doing a lot of work on the AV system since we were here last. And they have discovered one of the big issues with the back of the room hearing the front of the room has to do with proximity to the microphones.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. We're not having so much trouble with other elements. We've had to balance Zoom because the Zoom participants come in very loud, as you know. But in order to balance that, we have to pay special attention to our microphones when we're in the room.
Well, I resent that comment, so I appreciate it. Okay, for any introductory remarks, comments? If not, please proceed. Brian?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, this is 23 LSO 6262, draft 0.4, legislative stabilization reserve account obligations. This is 2-01 in the online meeting materials. This bill draft is one the Select Committee considered in September, and it reflects the recommendations of the Select Committee's working group or subcommittee to reduce the number and amount of borrowing and guarantee obligations on the LSRA. There are 8 instances in this draft. This draft is the same version that the Select Committee looked at. I will note a couple of potential changes, though, as I walk through the bill quickly. The staff comment on page 2 just again notes the need for the Select Committee to fill in the blanks with the limits that the committee wants to establish to set the maximum borrowing amount or guarantee authority. So the first page, page 3, lines 1 and 2, and 10 and 11, this is an amendment to 91418. And would change the authorization for borrowing from pooled fund investments to the state agency pool for purposes of the Department of Transportation, WYDOT, borrowing up to $200 million for projects before revenues are received. The primary thrust of this section is to basically provide for federal road projects to continue in the event of a federal government shutdown. The one staff comment on page 3 just notes the state agency pool, as far as I can tell, is not statutorily defined, and the committee may want to consider whether any other designation or further clarity is needed if that change goes ahead. The next change on page 4, lines 22 and 23, this is 93205E. This allows for interfund loans for purposes of school districts joining the Employees Group Insurance Program. I believe the Select Committee did talk about possibly repealing rather than just amending that maximum limit in this section. Page 5, line 28, this amends 94219B, which currently requires that an amount from the LSRA be transferred to the School Foundation Program account to ensure that the balance in that account is $100 million. The change would specify a maximum transfer amount from the LSRA. I believe when the select committee met in September, the figure for making that transfer would be $128 million approximately. I believe in the updated CREG, at least for this coming year, would be zero. Then on page 7, lines 4 through 7, this amends 2113-316A. This authorizes interfund loans from both the LSRA and the Common School account to the School Foundation Program account for purposes of cash flow. This would insert a sentence that that sets a maximum for interfund loans from the LSRA. Page 7, line 27 repeals 27.3303E. This subsection authorizes interfund loans from the LSRA for the Unemployment Compensation Fund. I believe the Department of Workforce Services testified in September that there was no issue with doing that. Then page 8, lines 40 and 41, this would amend a 2019 bill concerning the Veteran Skilled Nursing Facility. This initial draft struck 9 million and inserted 3 million, which at the time was the information we had about the current loan amount. In the intervening time between the two meetings, and there's an addendum that's part of the materials that discusses this in a staff comment, but our updated information is that there's $8 million that's been, of the 9 million that's been borrowed. So
So 2 million works. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, the addendum, which is part of the materials, proposes an amendment to just delete that out of the bill and leave the 9 million alone. Alternatively, the committee could establish an $8 million limit as well. Then moving on to page 10.
Go ahead, 1 second.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think we're going to have a similar situation now that we've funded that domiciliary. I don't know if staff, when they visited with the department, but so both at the skilled nursing facility, we done this 9 million as an upfront cost, and then it was going to be reimbursed through the federal dollars that we got from the Veterans Administration, I believe. And I think we're running into a similar situation as we build that domiciliary that we funded last year. I guess my question then back to staff is if they had any conversation with the department regarding any similar anticipated needs for the domiciliary, and if that would be separate, would we do that in a separate action, or it probably would be, I'm assuming.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I did not have conversations with the department, but I believe that is a separate item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll have to
Address it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Similar.
go ahead, Brian.
Yep. Then, Mr. Chairman, the change on page 10 is to the University of Wyoming Student Housing Bill. That's just a conforming amendment. And then page 11, lines 17 through 20, and then 31 through 34. Section 7 of this 2019 bill appropriated $15 million and then $34 million from the LSRA for purposes of a University of Wyoming student housing project. The new language here would revert any unexpended, unobligated funds on June 30, 2023. The one thing I would note is that if you keep that date, that section would need to be effective immediately in the bill.
So do we have any discussions with UW? And I mean, obviously the project, it probably is unlikely to be completed by then. So how would there be dollars to revert if the construction's not completed?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, I'm unaware of that, but my understanding is that none of these funds have been expended.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, go ahead. Anything else on the bill?
Yep, and then, Mr. Chairman, the last change would be an amendment to the 2022 budget bill that authorizes borrowing amounts necessary from the LSRA for meeting cash flow requirements from the Hathaway scholarships, and that would insert a maximum limit there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions. That's on page, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's on page 12.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, remind me, have they had to utilize that borrowing authority previously to address any shortfalls in the Hathaway?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, that has never been utilized.
Thank you.
Holly?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Kinsky, the borrowing authority from the LSRA to the Hathaway has not been utilized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was just wondering if I could get a link to where we see what the Hathaway expenditures have been and the timing on them, because my understanding is it's fundamentally a timing issue, that the need for the money occurs prior to it being in the account. But
Concern, Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Education Committee had a bill last year, and it'd probably be a good bill for this committee, really to combine the expenditure and the reserve account into one account. And the issue is exactly timing, because on July 1st, anything in excess sweeps to the corpus. Anything left in the reserve account sweeps to the corpus. We generally don't get the investment income till it starts rolling in later in the fall, but we have to make initial payments on the Hathaway in August. So we always, anything left in the expenditure account is rolled out and it tips, and then we got to go back into the reserve account. So there's always this right hand, left hand of cash movement. And the Hathaway is growing. It's one of the most stable accounts, financial stable accounts we have, but it always is dipping into the reserve account because of this timing issue. We could solve that with a short little bill here today too, if we wanted to, but so I don't know. I mean, that's the issue, and so it's not been used, but and until we fix the other issue, we probably should leave this alone. That's my thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anything else, Brian, on the walking through the bill? So committee, what's your pleasure? Let's just have an open discussion on what
Move the bill.
on we're comfortable with the bill. Well, there's a motion to move the bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, discussion on the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Please, go ahead.
As regards at least the Veterans Facility, and I think the discussion that Representative Larson concerned, I believe it'd be helpful if we asked the department, not just for a maximum borrowing authority, but for a cash flow statement, because we're supposed to be getting money back from the federal government, and then eventually the facility is supposed to cash flow as it fills up with personnel. So if they could give us maybe a 5-year timeline as to how they anticipate being able to pay this back, that would be helpful. Because just to make it the maximum amount and leave it there is not the preferred course. And then the same thing with the domiciliary, if we could get a cash flow statement or a projection. And I know they're going to be nervous about doing that, you know, that they'll be held to their feet will be held to the fire, but we need something that gives us a little bit more than just a maximum of $9 million. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So on that subject, Representative Larson, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're going to be having the agency come before us in December, and I think maybe, you know, in the Appropriations Committee, and that's probably where we'd have to do that amendment for the domiciliary. And so I think, I agree with Senator Kinsky, I think they ought to come prepared with that, so as we attempt to make an amendment to the budget bill to address that we understand what the projections are. I think that's fair.
Well, but then the question is, that's for the budget bill, but in this particular bill, do we need language to address that or direct it?
Mr. Chairman, I feel like I don't have enough information to really be able to answer the question. I'd like for them to give us a cash flow statement, and then that'll better inform what we want to do in terms of an amendment.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just go back to our staff again, if I understood you correctly, of the 9 million, they've expended or committed 8 of that with an anticipated of 1 million left. So if we had, we've taken care of all but 1 million of that. And so if we, to your point, Mr. Chairman, if we left
Just leave it.
this 3 million or 2 million, that more than covers their need to have access to these LSRA funds to complete that.
Yep.
Brian?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think if you leave 3 million in there, they will have effectively broken the law. because they borrowed more than they have authority to borrow. So I think really the two options here would be to delete this whole section out of the bill and just leave it at 9 million, or change the 3 to 8.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, given the difference of 1 million, it's easier to delete, and then in JAC in December, if we learn otherwise, we can adjust.
Well, it definitely simplifies the bill and pushing the bill and explaining it.
And Mr. Chairman, in staff, so when they're done, this goes away, right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe that's correct. They have,
So as it runs its course, in which they've basically done now that they're moved in there, and they've done that, then this will automatically heal itself and be gone, if I'm understanding correctly.
So would you entertain an amendment?
I would entertain amendment. Mr. Chairman, I propose we just leave it at the 9.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? Any further questions about that?
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree with the on and for the motion, but I also agree with the financial statement. But the deal is, when you do a cash flow statement or any other kind of, that kind of document, a year is a good educated guess. 2 years is just a guess. And so having them keep coming back and refining that each year, and then we have this top dollar, it sounds like a prudent way to go. And then we can adjust as we go when we see their financial statements each year, because these are ongoing, like the dorms are ongoing projects. Isn't that true? Or am I missing something?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew, so this 9 million borrowing authority, the way I read it, and I'm looking at page 9, really lines 2 and 3, the loan amount under this section is for, it's for actual planning and construction costs. And that's again on page 8, lines 35 and 36. So this borrowing authority is only for the planning and constructing. So it's not the operating.
No, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I understand that, but we'll be building and planning as we go. I mean, that's an ongoing project, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew, I believe that is just a one-time skilled nursing facility that actually has been constructed.
No, the skill, yes, I know. I was talking about some of the other, okay. All right, I got it. I got you where you're now. Okay. Sorry.
So what is typically the process for the nursing facility to report back to us or account for the return of those funds based upon during operations? Do we know?
Pass that again.
So the concept that this loan was going to be granted and then they would pay it back over time or using federal dollars, right? And so do we know the timing of when that's supposed to happen or how that works? So I guess what we really need is, if we do nothing, but we have them come and present to us and have LSO let them know that when we like, that's what we want them to do at JAC, then if any further action is needed in terms, or as Senator Kinski would suggest, we want to know how and when it's going to get paid back and what the process is. So that's what we really care about.
And Mr. Chairman, at least for the payment process, I think this section gives them 15 years to repay that, and the repayments are from their operations revenue.
And do we know where the 15 years came from? Was that just a number we threw in, or is that a real, that's what we need to understand. So my point is that if we direct them to present to us, then we'll understand what they're capable of doing and whether or not this language is sufficient or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's more of a procedural question. If we're leaving it at $9 million, which is the amendment, why would it be simpler just to delete the section for simplicity's sake? Because I'm a little concerned it's going to be an interesting body next year with so many new people. So Is that friendly?
And Mr. Chairman, that's how I understood the motion, was just to delete that entire section out of the bill.
Okay, because I think that in general, if I may, that should be our approach to these bills, that simple is going to be better. That's actually always my approach. Anyhow, thank you, Senator Hicks.
Representative Schwartz, the simple-minded amongst us, myself included, are greatly appreciative.
So just so we understand, let's restate the motion. It's a motion to delete?
Section, because what we've done is, in this section, we're leaving it as drafted to where they had authority to borrow up to $9 million for the construction of the skilled nursing facility, which is now completed. They're moving into the, and then this will just go away with the money that they've done. So we would just delete that section.
Okay, does everyone understand the motion? Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion carries. Let's go back and walk through it, if we would. Any changes to page 1 or 2? Any amendments? And any discussions on the staff comment on page 3 or 2 or 3? Go ahead.
Damn thing, there we go. I'm curious, since it's a call out to the Department of Transportation, this money, the question I had is why is this the source of cash flow for the DOT? They're largely funded by the feds. What do other states do in order to fund the cash flow up to their DOTs? Why are we tapping this particular coffee can?
Brian, or?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we do have a representative from DOT who is joining us online.
Who is who? Please come on
Dennis
in.
Byrne. There we go.
Oh, there we go. I recognize that face.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Good. My name is Dennis Byrne. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for WYDOT. In terms of what other states are doing, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that I have that answer for you today. What I can tell you is the national average in terms of providing state funding versus federal funding for highway projects is 70% state, 30% federal. For WYDOT, it's reversed. It's 70% federal and 30% state. So we are very reliant on the federal dollars in order to be able to make those contractor payments. We're usually, now we do pay state dollars up front, but we are reimbursed within just a day or two from the federal dollars, which allows us then to cash flow the other expenditures for the department. So it is very important for us to have access to the $200 million in case of a federal shutdown. During peak construction, Mr. Chairman, our federal dollars or our construction dollar outlay can be as high as 50 million. And our total outlay can be as high as 75 million. So if there were a federal shutdown, Mr. Chairman, we would not be able to cash flow those expenditures for more than a month if we were relying just on WYDOT's current cash flow without this ability to borrow. Now, we've not utilized the borrowing authority to date. However, we were very close on at least 2 occasions. One was in July of 2014, and the other was in October of 2021, at which time we were about to run out of cash due to continuing resolution not having been signed. So, Mr. Chairman, from our perspective, the way the bill is written makes sense in terms of where the money's coming from. I think we're pretty agnostic on that, but it would be critical in the case of a federal shutdown that we would need access to these dollars to be able to continue to pay contractor payments and other vendor payments related to WYDOT expenditures.
And so Dennis, then that raises the question, if it was 100 million versus 200 million, what's the difference?
Mr. Chairman, it would all come down to how long the federal government were shut down for. Again, we would have expenditures high as $75 million total. So if it was only a $100 million borrowing authority, we really would be limited to a little over a month in terms of cash flowing for contractor payments and all the rest of our vendor payments. So it seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that the 200 million makes more sense based on our peak expenditures during those construction seasons. But again, Mr. Chairman, I'll let the committee make the policy decisions, obviously.
Further-
Mr. Chairman,
Please, go ahead.
just follow-up question on that. So in recent or even long-term history, what's the longest period that the federal government's ever shut down?
Mr. Chairman, I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head.
I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 weeks.
Mhm.
So gets back to the 100 million question. If 75 million is the maximum exposure on a monthly basis, we've never seen the federal government shut down for that period of time. So it just comes down to a risk assessment as to whether
Well, and the other
100
question
millions
is, if the
is
federal
adequate.
government shuts down for a month, there's going to be a lot of things shut down besides road construction.
Yeah.
And the world will be changing. But
Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me like the 100 million would more than adequately cover any contingencies that we might have associated with the federal shutdown.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
my inclination is that it should be nothing until we have more information. It's this theoretical possibility of a more than a 1 month shutdown during the peak season where their cash flow needs may exceed $70 million. And for that, we're tapping up to whether 100 million or 200 million out of the state agency pool. I'd like to know what other states do or have done when there has been an actual shutdown in the midst of peak part of construction season. I suspect the contractors just wait till the shutdown's resolved. The idea of backstopping $200 million out of this, just absent some really compelling case, makes me a little bit nervous.
Well, and that raises another issue, and I think the Treasurer's Office may want to address this, and that is the state agency pool the right pool to be picking from? So you want,
Mr. Chairman, before
ahead.
we bring them up there, if I
Yeah.
may, I have another question for YDOT.
go ahead.
The question I have is if we look at the history of these shutdowns, usually they're a couple of weeks to 3 weeks. So what's the pay cycle on that? In other words, is it's not like we're not going to pay. It would be a scenario that under that it's just a 2-week delayed payment under a shutdown. So how does that function? Because by the time we process the actual payment, so go in, get the borrowing authority, move that money. My question is the reality is if it's a 2 or 3 week payment, it's more of a delayed payment than it is a non-payment. And what would take the time to then shift this in and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and make the payment out of the borrowing authority. So a little bit of a discussion, how long it takes to actually move that money around to get that money into YDOT's account and then process that out. High likelihood that the federal shutdown's over anyway. And so just if we could have a little discussion on that too. I'm just
Go ahead,
curious
Dennis.
as to the time frame.
Dennis, if you have an answer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a specific time frame. My understanding based on previous conversations back to 2021 was that it would happen within a matter of a day or two. The Transportation Commission would send a letter to the treasurer letting them know that we needed the borrowing authority, and the treasurer would move the money. My understanding is very quickly upon receiving that letter. We could have a commission meeting advertised within 24 hours. So we really could have the money, I think, within 2 to 3 days. But we probably need to get the treasurer's opinion on that as well.
Okay. Dawn, go ahead. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Dawn Williams. I'm the Deputy State Treasurer.
Can you pull your mic closer?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll be mindful of turning my head too. That was the last meeting's. So our concerns about borrowing from the state agency pool in general are that because those funds belong to other, we are fiduciaries and are holding those funds on behalf of many agencies, of many programs. And to borrow those funds or to loan those funds with uncertain terms of repayment or of interest rates, although I do see an attempt to establish a return of interest rate, it is problematic to us because we cannot, in the past, at times, depending on the kind of loans that are made, they are sometimes forgiven by the legislature, and that is at the detriment then to the LSRA, right? The funds are not repaid and there is no interest rate of return. If that were to be applied to these pooled funds that belong to state agencies and other entities within state government, we would find that to be problematic. Many of these accounts, the state agency pool is comprised of, there are some large players in that account, like the water accounts. Currently, the reserve accounts are in the state agency pool, but they're primarily made up of all of these smaller agency accounts that are a collection of fees and dues and, it's other people's money, I guess is the point that I'm trying to make. And so that is our concern primarily with loaning from the SAP in general.
Go ahead.
So I have a question, but a comment first, because the staff comment intrigued me in that the state agency pool has no statutory definition, which is problematic for me in the first place. But then, if we were going to take money out of the state agency pool, could it be done on an aggregated basis, essentially, so that it would be proportionate. So these little pools would essentially be contributing almost nothing to a loan.
Well, Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, it could be aggregated, but say you've got a fund like Cultural Trust Fund expenditure account. They take every bit of interest that they earn from that account and they award grants. So any amount that is loaned out is a grant that's not made. And so what if you have, one of the accounts in this SAP is an emergency water account? Well, what if there's an emergency water situation like we had the Goshen County Irrigation District and that money's loaned somewhere else? They don't have that money then to be able to meet the needs that cash is set aside for. And Mr. Chairman, and to address the definition of the state agency pool, the reason that that's not, the pooled fund investments, state fund or state agency pool, it's because it's all of this microcosm of smaller accounts and we just pool them together. And so state agency pool has been the moniker that's been assigned to this conglomeration of accounts that have the same characteristics that I'm describing as far as fiduciary responsibility and assets held on behalf of others.
So what you're suggesting is that we need to change something. Just by saying the state agency pool versus pooled fund investments doesn't solve any problems. It's just another name for the same thing.
Mr. Chairman, that's right.
So if we do, so your suggestion is we need to do something, but the state agency pool is not the right language.
Mr. Chairman, it's not the language for us, it's the idea of that body of funds that we would prefer not to be.
So, Mr.
loaned.
Chairman, Dawn, if you may contrast that with Pool A.
Well, Mr. Chairman, pooled A funds are those, that are not more, the needs of those accounts are designed to not be as readily available. So if you made loans out of Pool A, we would have the same concern because those are monies that are held on behalf of other people. But if there were a mechanism that is a protection for those funds as to the interest rate, the kinds of money that could be loaned from them, one of the requests from LSO was, hey, of all of the funds that are currently authorized for loan from the LSRA, what would you recommend be assigned to the LSR or to the SAP or not? And any account that has the potential of being forgiven is generally what we said we would prefer not to be from the LSRA. Any unlimited, some of these loan amounts are unlimited, and then some of them are like for a group insurance. So when the state is borrowing or loaning to itself, those are the instances where we would not recommend using other people's money. That's where we would say the LSRA, that the state is loaning from itself to itself in those cases. So that's when, those are the instances that are more likely to be forgiven. And so we wouldn't suggest that those loans be forgiven from the state agency pool, that the LSRA is probably a better place for those.
Further questions for Don? Mr. Treasurer, welcome.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, real quick first.
Okay, go ahead.
So I understand everything you said. Nonetheless, should we have some kind of statutory definition of what the state agency pool is? Because we refer to it in a lot of places.
You know, Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, I think that is an interesting question. We do refer to it, but it is, because it's this, each of the funds within the state agency pool is defined separately in statute. And so that's why that we have just kind of pooled, where they're in a pool for investing purposes, but each of those accounts is of course maintained separately. So I'm not sure.
So for example, you keep the reserve accounts in the state agency pool.
Mhm.
Reserve accounts now are roughly $1 billion, right?
That's
And
right.
so it makes more sense if you're going to say the state agency pool to designate something within the state agency pool that it's not other people's money.
Mr. Chairman.
Is that a fair
Mhm.
characterization? Yeah.
That makes sense.
Okay, further questions for Don? And go ahead, Kurt. Welcome.
And I guess looking at where we'd probably rather have this is probably in the, is Elizra and in the first tranche. And that really has to go with, to the extent that if you take $200 million and you have to take investments that are longer term out of the middle or the long-term tranches, you can have some liquidated damages there, especially in the long-term tranche. And getting into this, having to, I guess, profile $200 million into something that has some degree of liquidity has a cost in by itself. And you guys all know that because you've been fighting that battle here this whole year. So to this one here, where it hasn't been used in, I don't know, a couple of decades, I guess, almost, it's a nice backstop, but we got to figure out a backstop that necessarily doesn't have the problems that you guys have been trying to solve. And
Well,
I think that's why you're asking about this.
That's a good point, Kurt, but another question is, if we have a federal shutdown for a month and no dollars are transferring, we're going to have a lot more issues than just YDOT. And
Yeah.
it's half of the funding to the state of Wyoming in our budgets, particularly on the education side and the health side. I mean, and it depends on the severity or what type of a shutdown it is as well.
Yeah, and I guess if you were going to do something like that, I would look at, on some of these areas here, I'd say go to the first tranche, put a cap on it in percentages and dollar amount. So if the first tranche goes down, it's the lesser of, 20% or $200 million or something. And that way, to your point, Mr. Chairman, is that liquidity that's in that bottom tranche is going to have to be shared with a lot of people in state government rather than just the construction department.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to fish around here. Maybe we've got an idea or something that can work. Number one, this for me is very problematic, and particularly in the scenario that you may describe. Is we just have an agency that submits a warrant to the treasurer and they move $100 million or $200 million, and when we may have a much larger looming problem out there. That to me is problematic in just the current structure without having to run through some elected official. So I find that problematic. The other thing I'm wondering is I'm trying to recollect what we have right now that the governor has borrowing authority out of the Elizra for emergency purposes. And my preference would be to probably make this would be an eligible expenditure that the governor could consider. But what I'd like to do is have him being able to balance the needs and then make a determination than just have an agency submit a warrant to the treasurer to start moving money around. And so I'd be more inclined to say that, you know, the governor would have the authority out of his borrowing authority to be able to authorize payment out of the LSRA for this versus just doing the current way we have structured.
And that borrowing authority would be generic. It wouldn't be directed just to WIDOT.
Correct. And I think we already have that, and maybe staff can look up what that currently is, but I think it's a substantial amount based on the last budget we just passed.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good idea, but I would say that, you know, do it with a percentage and put a percentage cap and a total cap that the governor's borrowing authority would be. So, you know, it's not $200 million and you guys come back and there's nothing left on the table but scraps. So I think that, yeah, capping it with the percentage and a dollar amount.
And it would also be capped by obviously, if it goes below 500 million in the LSRA, then there wouldn't be no borrowing authority, depending on how we direct it.
I don't think you guys are that generous to give them 500 million, but you know, it's your call.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, the 500 million is already called for.
Yeah.
So the question is, as we have this discussion, is do we know enough about this process to understand it, to continue down this road, or or is there more homework that needs to be done?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the answer to the question's both, but if we don't do anything, we still leave the $200 million drag on the LSRA for this purposes. So we have to do something, right? And so the question is become what? You know, do we shift this over to the governor's office, or do we just repeal this section and run a risk analysis and work on it another year? It looks to me those are what I would suggest are probably two potential alternatives we can consider.
So I was just reading this on Saturday. Depending on what happens in Congress, that one of the tools that is already being debated is to shut down the government in order just to reduce overall spending.
You know, Mr. Chairman, and the beauty of that is if they did that, we will still have time in the next legislative session that we can't repeal this until we get to the session. So this is going to stand through that federal shutdown or showdown or whatever you want to call it. So my preference right now would probably be to repeal this section, and knowing that we're going to have this, we're going to know a lot more by the time we actually get the budget to the floor, or this bill to the floor, that we could tweak it at that point and probably bring in the, you know, the executive branch and get some input from them on this. But
Okay, Representative Larson.
So a question, I guess, to this discussion that I'm trying to get is we've got this whatever amount, 100 million borrowing authority for WYDOT. We're kind of thinking that we want to funnel that through the governor. We give, I think in Senate File 50, a couple of years ago, we give the governor 10 that he can do for a disaster. We would then look at using the LSRA as a mechanism, but change that amount where he would make that allocation then to WYDOT or any other need as that federal restriction would demand or require. Am I understanding that right? And if I am, I'm seeing nod ahead, then it seems to me that we would just, because there's a lot of simple things we can do to clean the LSRA demands up. And then, but I would just, I agree. I think I'd pull this section out and let you smart guys figure out how much you want to do that in the process. So I would have an amendment, Mr. Chairman, when we get to that point.
I think you could, amendment's appropriate because we're
So
working on it.
to remove this section out of the bill.
For a second.
Mr. Second for discussion, is it to remove it or to repeal it?
Out of this bill.
To remove this section out of this bill, so, and then we can put it back in as we get closer to session. If we'd like to, we can amend, but we're just removing this section of the bill out so we can continue moving the bill forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'd rather just repeal the borrowing authority completely while we study it. My amendment would be, I'd rather see an amendment that says we're just going to repeal the borrowing authority completely. I agree with Senator Hicks. Let's get it out of here, and we've got plenty of time to study it. But to be able to draw 200 million or 100 million, the way this is structured now, it's a non-starter. We have some other options we can study, but I believe this should be repealed. So on against the amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think the process would be you need to have an amendment to the amendment to do that, or vote this amendment down, and then we'll debate that issue as a protocol. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to deleting this section and leaving YDOT in limbo on this. This is more than YDOT, Mr. Chairman. This is an entire industry out in our state. And we create this donut hole here where if something happens, you shut down an entire industry in a state like this. I'm very wary about that. Mr. Chairman, I would not be in favor of deleting this section. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, would it not, if we deleted this section, it just leaves it the way it is now? It really, deleting this section does not eliminate that end, correct?
I think the proposal is that we delete the section from the statute.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make an amendment to the amendment that we would repeal this section. And so that stays in the bill, that repealer. So that's a placeholder. If we just eliminate, there's nothing there. And we very well may get to the session, and even with staff's help, forget that we had this discussion. So that repealer is still in the bill, and it's a placeholder. We will know what the federal government does by then, and hopefully get some more input on how to do that. I'm just worried about not having something in the bill, so that would be my amendment.
So I do have one question on that. Let's assume that if we put it in there and then put, but that repealer then dies on the floor, or, I mean, there's sufficient argument that it doesn't pass. But then we haven't fixed the problem. And when the problem is it seems to me we ought to at least tackle the 200 million and tackle the state agency pool issue, so that if it does survive, we fix that problem.
Yeah, if we decide, and I would agree with that, Mr. Chairman, if we stay with the current structure, that they have borrowing authority and YDOT can just do that. So, I mean, there's really two ways to do that. Is one would be to do the repealer, or one would have a draft amendment ready just to say, we're going to reduce that to 100 million, and it comes out of
LSRA.
First tranche of LSRA. So I think we can have that ready, by the time we start working this stuff in Cheyenne, but we got two placeholders then.
So Brian, you understand that?
So repeal this section, amendment ready to change it to 100 million from the first 500 million of LSRA.
Well, the question is the first 5 million. Why would we designate? Is there a value to that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that I was just saying that based on the committee's discussion.
Well, I think that was a comment from the treasurer, but that's not, I don't see any reason to limit it to the first 500 million, to the first tranche, so to speak. I would just say the LSRA.
Love that word.
Yeah. Any comments on, on that?
We love tranche. No, I think that's a good idea, Mr. Chairman. And then again, I do think we should explore that option of looking at, allowing the governor to make that call with some borrowing authority, how we structure that. But that'll be a discussion that we need to have with the executive branch and the state treasurer's office.
Well, and that makes sense to me as well. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I just need to make sure I understand what the motion is.
Just trust me.
So,
Second.
all those in favor? I'm not the chair, I forgot. No, I just want to make sure. So the motion on the floor now is the repeal, not the delete. And if we repeal, that entire, it's out of the statutes. We no longer have anything there for YDOT, and we are having good faith reliance that we will come up with a solution to this sometime in the near future when I won't be there. I mean, you can take out that last part. Right, but I just want to make sure so basically YDOT has nothing if we repeal.
Yeah, but understand. The statute stays in place until the bill would actually pass. We're going to take this back up and we have an amendment ready if we decide. I mean, we certainly don't want to get into that scenario, but that is the placeholder.
Mr. Chairman, my only question is, pardon? Right, and so my question I'm still a little confused, because if we just deleted this section from this current bill, fundamentally, what's the difference if we know we're going to address the problem later? Is there really any functional difference?
Functionally, no, I just think it is in bold print when we put that repealer in, says this needs to be addressed versus just delete it from the bill.
Okay.
Because then that section doesn't even exist anymore. I want something in this bill draft, whether.
We're just trying to maintain a presence in the bill.
This is a placeholder here.
Okay, I get it.
Senator Driscoll?
You know-
So I think it's the right thing to do. It basically will kill the bill if we don't come up with a solution. I mean, it's obvious from what Rep. Overmuller said, we're not going to damage YDOT. So either we fix it or the bill's probably in danger. I have one other piece that falls in that does not we've got 2% since in the bill on the loan repayment rate. And I would suggest if we go on with this, that we make that a floating rate, because with where we're at right now, 2% might be exceptionally cheap money 2 years from now. We're about to put in statute when we do this a 2% loan, that I'm loath for the legislature going forward not to make floating rates on what they do, because we go up and down all the time. So that'll come after this for discussion, but I really do think all the time in statute, you get these rates that are set in statute, and then the interest goes to 10%. And it doesn't behoove you much to repay when you've got an 8% difference on a rate.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
the reason I like the repealer is it keeps it on the table in front of us. It also puts the onus on YDOT to do some research on what happens in other states, and I'd like that research to be vetted by staff as well. Representative Overmuller, I don't believe that there would be the calamitous circumstance in the event of the remote possibility of the longest shutdown in history was 35 days. And that was so punitive to the Republicans, I don't see them ever doing that again. I've done business in states where we've had a shutdown and you just wait for your money. I mean, it's not the end of the world. And so I'm certain there are other DOTs that have crossed this bridge, and there's ways of dealing with it short of a check of this size on the state agency pool or on any state fund. Then kind of, I guess, if that doesn't suit the cut of your jib, we always have the option of coming back and exploring this option of giving the governor greater emergency authority if he really feels like the industry is going to be shut down as a consequence of the government shutdown. But in the event of a shutdown that goes that long, it's not just DOT that's got the problem, and I think that's been alluded to. The whole state government is going to have some bill-paying problems. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the good senator is so articulate that I'm afraid his arguments would probably win. That's why I'm against this repealer, because when the next round of arguments come up, he's really good at it. I'm just not going to be for this repeal of this.
Further discussion?
Back to the argument, I understand both, and I'm for the repealer to go ahead and do it. But as far as why can't they wait? I can tell you, as being an old YDOT contractor years ago, they quit paying their bills. If they don't have money, they're not gonna pay the people, and that stops your work in the field the same day that it happens. Is if you know you're not getting paid and you're on a dirt job, and I can tell you, I've got a contractor right now, we're dealing with YDOT. When these guys get 800,000, $1 million, $1.5 million out, they shut people down. You take your contractors and that the dirt work stops. And it gets really tough because then you get into a deal, you've got a contract they're supposed to perform, but they know the state's not gonna pay them. So, you know, I'm one of the ones, regardless of what we do, the state has to pay its bills. And we'll figure out how to pay them. But I'm still in favor of the repealer because I think it forces us to move. But I don't ever want to put the state in a position that we cheat our own contractors because we won't pay our bills to YDOT, which means YDOT obviously can't pay them. So I think we gotta be a little careful where we head down the path.
Okay. Any further discussion on the amendment to the amendment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no?
No.
Okay, I need a show of hands. All those in favor, raise their hand. All those opposed? I think the motion, 1, 2, I need to count up the. Tara, are you voting or are you waving?
Blowing kisses.
I voted with the Senate.
Okay, so you're an aye on the amendment. So I think, yeah, we need, I think I'm gonna have LSO count for us. Is it 5-5?
No, the good guys won.
Mr. Chairman, you actually had 5-6. 5 aye, 6 no.
6 no. Okay, that let's make sure that that's the vote. Once again, all those in favor of the amendment to amend, raise their hand and keep your hands up, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed, raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You are right. That motion fails.
Good guys did.
So, yeah, motion failed. So do we have an amendment to address the fund? Can we just talk about the fund on this? Is there a motion?
There is a motion. I would amend that from 200 million to 100 million, the authority to.
And would it be a friendly amendment to change the state agency pool to the LISRA?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's currently out of the LISRA, is it not?
No, it's out of the pooled fund investment, which is the same thing as the pool funds. So everyone understand the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carries. And so
Mr. Chairman,
that would also go down to page 10 and 11, Brian, right? Okay. Go ahead.
so, okay, you lost me there. That would also go down to page 10 and 11.
No, line 10 and 11, because it's
Okay.
another reference to the state agency.
All right, and then, Mr. Chairman, did you want to talk about an amendment that we would, conceptually, that we would move this into a generic authority for the governor rather than just being an automatic draw by the, on the state auditor?
So what we could do is have that rough draft of such an amendment kind of put together that we can bring back over the lunch and we can talk about it. Because I don't know if we want to wordsmith it right now. But we could have Brian and Ian kind of explore that and come back with it. Does that make sense, Brian and Ian?
There we go. Let me just double check. So it would be an amendment to provide a borrowing authority similar to what the governor has now for the public welfare emergencies, but it would be a more general authority to borrow from the LSRA for just cash flow needs, is that, or?
It needs to be specific to emergency expenditures in light of a federal shutdown. It's got to have the language only when the federal government shuts down. And I think maybe leave that broad enough. Again, back to, I think, Chairman's thing, is it may be broader than YDOT, but it would only be under that circumstance.
Okay. All right, now we're at page 3. Anything else on page 3? Page 4. So on page 4, there's a dollar amount that needs to be inserted. Do we have a motion on the dollar amount? Go ahead.
You know, the fund is in such healthy condition. Is this a continuing need? I mean, we've passed policies to make it clear on the group health insurance, how much they're to maintain in reserves. Hopefully, we'll never have the situation where they come to us in panic again, that they're overdrawn. Is there even a need for this continuing borrowing authority?
So do we have anyone online from the A&I?
Mr. Chairman, no, we don't, but I believe you did hear from Director Bach in September. And if I recall correctly, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, she indicated that this probably is no longer necessary.
That's my recollection.
Yes.
So the motion then would be to,
Eliminate the borrowing authority.
yeah, is to delete, I mean, or to amend and delete the section, right? Repeal it, right? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on that?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I fundamentally am fine with it, except that was the testimony we received was a point in time. And there have been other points in time where perhaps the EGI funding might not be able to sustain if a number of school districts opted in. I have no way of gauging that. So I'm a little hesitant to just, I mean, I guess we can add it back in at a later, I guess you all can add it back in at a later date. But I'm a little concerned with just repealing this.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think the appropriate statement is all y'all. All y'all. Teton County.
Well,
Representative Harshman.
Thanks for calling on me.
Referee.
Actually, I think there's no harm with just leaving this alone. In fact, I think most of these things were put in place to solve problems that can occur. And that's the beauty of the LSRA. It's hardest working account in America. And it's really been a blessing on these cash flow issues. Hopefully, we never need it. But if we do, it's there and we can pay our bills. So I just, I think it's fine the way it is. Just leave it alone. There's no harm in leaving it.
Well, just in a response to that, I don't disagree with that, but the idea that that a $60 million number makes no sense. I mean, that's an annual number, and it would be a one-time fix, and it's never been under 60 million. It was under 10, 20 million 2 years ago, though. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. As to the no harm issue, I mean, we're talking about releasing this money to be invested better, right? That it's not tied up. So my question is, does the treasurer now tie up that 60 million in anticipation of this, or do they just ignore it for investment purposes?
6% interest rates. Your mics. 6% interest rates.
Would you put that amount in there that they tie up that amount of the Lord? Not a bad
Mr.
thing.
Chairman,
Go ahead, please.
Yes.
we do not tie it up.
Not an issue.
So the motion is to delete, right? Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is that an aye, Mr. Grew? Okay. All those in favor, raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That motion passes.
Yeah, that's
So,
why you can
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with, as we continue to go down, I agree with what Representative Harshman is saying, that of the accounts that we're going to commit, this is the account that we do. That's what we created it for. But I think what we found is that we've just continued to add more and more. And I think every once in a while, there's a time that you have to stand back and say, we need to remove, if we're not using it, get rid of it, allow the borrowing, allow the earning capacity to be a little greater. If we need it, fine, let's keep it there. But if we don't, then let's take advantage of it. So I don't think we just leave them all and say, and just continue to add more and more on. That's what concerns me. And so I hope we're just kind of doing a purging here and making the fund work better for us.
Okay, page 5. Page 6.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering with the work that the Appropriations Committee has been trying to do is to clean these accounts up, and particularly with this is where we do the automatic appropriation of the 100 million to the school capital construction account. The session the Appropriations Committee has been working on is let's just write one check. So we're diverting all the funds into the school foundation program account to try to build that account up. Part of this is to build the reserves. We'll get into this a little bit later. But why would we do this when we know we're going to write 2 checks out of the LSRA right now instead of just writing 1? In other words, we get to the end, what I'd prefer to do is just have the LSRA backstop the school foundation program, whatever that is. Instead of saying, well, we're going to move $100 million and then we're going to come back and then we're going to move more money in there. It seems like
Right, 2
kind of a
checks.
convoluted way if we're really going to do this. And so,
So the motion is to strike the amendment on page.
well, it would be to repeal that section. That we just do the 100 million automatic appropriation and then probably bring in some language and just say that the LSR backstops the school foundation program account. And so the backstop's there, but rather than move 2 different pots of money, once just to restore it, to start the beginning of the year with $100 million and then come back and go through the session, and whatever our deficit is, we're going to fund out of the LSRA anyway. It's just move the money one time. I think it makes more transparency as to what the cost of education is, and it simplifies the process.
Is your motion to delete this section? Or do you want to amend it to say that the LSRA shall backstop the public school
My
foundation program?
preference would be delete the auto appropriation of the $100 million and then just bring in the language that says that the LSRA will backstop the Common School Permanent Land Fund.
But my only question is, and this would be for, I think, Representative Harshman, if it's a cash flow issue, some money needs to be in the fund in order to do anything. Or if not, that means it would be like a regular draw on it in order to cover those expenses. And I don't know if that makes sense either.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Polly Scott, LSO Budget Fiscal. Just a few things I'd like to clarify. This provision is not for an appropriation of 100 million, but to bring the balance
Up
of the SFP to 100 million. So if there were a shortfall, it could be more than 100 million. And this provision is to address a structural deficit in the SFP, and the borrowing provision is on the next page.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the 100 million number comes really from the Hathaway days and also probably 2005 when we moved a couple $1 billion of school foundation program money to build schools and to start the Hathaway and the endowed professors. Those were all school foundation program monies. And the 100 million was a number that was just to keep that balance at 100 million minimum back in those days for cash flow purposes. So when this was put into law, I think it was 2017 or 18, to use the LSRA as a backstop, so we make sure on July 1st we can pay our bills and keep our schools going. It's worked really well. I mean, it's been incredible. It's probably saved us from drastic cuts in education, and it's certainly saved us from a tax increase. And so this is a classic example of how the LSRA has worked perfectly. And then with the refuel, the 1.25% of the permanent fund that refuels this, it's really incredible. And you can see the profiles. We're going to have the largest LSRA ever dreamed of. And I think that's got to be a major discussion today, I think, as well. Particularly, maybe it's in this bill. How big do you let that thing go? I mean, but I think that, you know, this is really a good example of the LSRA working. So I would, you know, I don't know, we haven't had a second on this motion yet.
There is no motion.
Okay, so I'll make the motion, Mr. Chairman, that we just delete this section out of the bill, that we don't even, just leave that alone. It's working well. And I don't think we want to go down that road and fight over it again, because I think it's proven itself out.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
on and against the motion, and perhaps you, Mr. Chairman, or somebody else can help me understand. You know, first of all, we got to pay for education. There's just no question about it. And we're down in Cheyenne every 12 months. Actually, it seems like we're down there much more often than that, for way longer than it should be. And these kind of auto appropriations just seem a poor substitute for a rigorous cash flow projection and then appropriating what's needed. And so why is this necessary at all? I get it, you know, during times when we've had all kinds of money sloshing around and we just backstop everything, as opposed to, I've always had to plan my cash a little bit more closely than that, never having that much cash laying around. Why is this necessary at all when we know we've got to fund education? Why don't we just go down there every 12 months and appropriate what we need to appropriate?
So I think that's consistent with the motion. The motion is to delete this because it's not necessary.
No, Mr. Chairman, my understanding is he wants to keep the backstop in place.
I don't think that's the motion. Is that the motion? Okay. Okay.
Which is absolutely the motion,
Yeah, okay.
to keep the
To leave it in
backstop in
place.
place.
Just
leave it exactly.
Mr. Chairman.
Delete it from the, I see, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, delete it from the bill, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman and good Senator, I would say that the appropriations process is unaffected by this. The appropriations are taking place during the session. This is simply an auto funding pay your bills mechanism if we run short. And that's really, we decide what the bill is going to be paid in January and February and March. But this is if we come up short, we're going to still pay our bills. We're not going to go into some kind of mode where, you know, state starts melting down right before the school year starts. And so I think it's really a excellent way to use this account to make sure we stabilize, use the reserve account and stabilize the funding of K-12 education if we run into shortfalls like we have when we've had the sharpest, steepest drop in revenues in our state's history, starting in the spring of 2016. So, and you know, and these things will go, because we fund our schools on property taxes. Minerals pay most of the property taxes. So we're going to see this again. And I think this is a great mechanism to balance it out. So encourage your aye vote on the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Just 1 second, Representative Overman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we left the session after the budget, on the profile that we left in March, I think in March 29th was the final issuance of the profile. And that demonstrated a $128 million transfer to come to this 100 million. And as the profile has changed, if you look at the current one, that's gone away. But to Representative Harshman's point, it still needs to be there because you just never know. This $100 million guarantee out of the LSRA was a compromise that we drew a few years ago in exchange for other things to guarantee that ending balance. And I think we need to leave it where it is. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, and I think Representative Harshman brings up a good point. It was intended in the case, but it's just become an auto appropriation. It still doesn't, it has not been adequate since 2016. It's just an additional appropriation. So it's not functioning, I would say, the way it was intended to do, because it's not just funding education, it's just partially funding the education deficit that we have. So we're still writing 2 checks out of the LSRA. And so if we really wanted to do that, we would get rid of the $100 million and just come back and say it's going to be whatever that deficit is, because we've got a deficit. And if there is no deficit, then there is no auto appropriation. So I'm not saying that we don't need to do something to backstop education. I just think this is a convoluted way to write several checks at different times of the year. One's coming in June 1st. If it's just a cash flow issue, we've done this with a number of agencies that we can do other things as far as borrowing authority as to what the actual cash flow needs is. It's the auto appropriation with a set amount versus the concept of what we're trying to do here, because we're still writing another check and another check. We get the auto appropriations, we start out, and then we still have that. Now the profile going forward is a little bit different, but we're still going to, we'll probably end up this session still writing additional checks for school finance. And so that's my only point. I don't disagree with the need that we need to have some mechanism in place. I just don't think this is the best mechanism.
Representative Larson.
So I have a question, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know if it's to the treasurer's office or to you guys, but if we don't have an amount in there and we say that this fund, meaning the total of the LSRA, will be a backstop to education, then how do these guys plan on how much that is for investment purposes year to year? So does then that tie up the whole LSRA or a large component of it at a lower rate in anticipation that they may have to transfer and backfill the school foundation account? So we're trying to identify what those amounts, those obligations on the LSRA are, but if we're saying now we're not going to do that and allow the total fund to be the backstop come what may, then how do you plan on investing that?
Go ahead, Kurt.
I guess to that point, I'll bring up something that I talked about is the tranches, is that when you do these guarantees, to make sure that we're not getting, have a difference in returns versus obligating these funds. If we could stay with the money that's appropriated in the first tranche, then necessarily we don't have to worry about losing money in our investment side. And so, if it's $500 million, then as to your point, Mr. Chairman, that's the cap of all of these things. If you say it in the statute, that is the first tranche, and then define those tranches. So, and then once you've spent that money and you've either done it by statutory appropriations or the real appropriation process where you take everything into account and sort it out from there, that's really a policy decision. But yeah, I'd like to see if you could keep it to the first tranche. Then we don't have to worry about selling things off, taking losses on them, and to fund some automatic appropriations. And I think that if you, I guess I'm a little bit curious about writing one check for everything that education costs. It seems like that's more or less a blank check, which might really some people might really like that, if you just write one check, no matter what the cost of education is. But this is really for cash flow purposes, from what I understand. But if we can keep it in the first tranche, I think that gives us some, I guess, some investment
Appreciate it. Further comment?
benefits.
Jerry, go ahead. Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 5, going to Senator Hicks's point that he was trying to make, if you look at line 22, the last word starting with "and," line 23, an amount necessary to restore the unobligated. So the auto appropriation isn't 100 million, it's the number needed to bring the ending balance to 100 million. So it's not a series of different payments. This is a one, like when we left as I said earlier, 128 million, that was the auto appropriation in March, was 128 million. And that restored the ending balance in this school foundation program to 100 million. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a motion on the motion was to delete, right?
There is no.
There is no motion.
Just discussion.
So is there a motion to deal with what?
There is, Mr. Chairman, there is a motion to delete this section from the bill.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think there was a second. Yeah,
Okay, on the motion,
yeah.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those no?
No.
No.
Oh, I was raising my hand. No.
Okay, let's do that again. Tell us what the motion is.
Mr. Chairman, the motion is just to take this section out of the bill, so it's not.
So it stays the way it
It
is.
stays, so we maintain current law and current policy, using the LSRA as a
That's-
funding mechanism backstop in case school found, so we can meet our
The motion is
appropriation.
all in favor of deleting this from the bill.
That's right.
Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
I think that motion carries.
We see a show of hands,
That's
because I
all right.
didn't hear those two on the screen.
All those in favor of deleting this section from the bill, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, there's 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, going on to page 7.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
before we leave that topic, I would ask if staff might, I don't know if there's already an existing memo that in the background of this. I'd understand why in January, February, March, we can't anticipate what our bills will be for education on July 1. I still don't get the need for this as an auto appropriation as opposed to an appropriation. So
I think we know the answer to that, is because our funding mechanism for education, particularly on the capital construction side, is underfunded. So we always have to shore up the dollars for it.
And I believe that should be done as part of our appropriations process rather than an auto appropriation.
Well, the answer is.
The question is, can we not,
I think we all agree to that. And
why can we not anticipate in January, February, March of every single year what our bills are going to be on July 1?
And fund it.
And fund it.
And provide a revenue source for it. And I think that's what education's trying to do.
Mr. Chairman, I think, and part of it is when the funds arrive, and now with monthly payment of ad valorem, our largest taxpayers pay, so that revenue is coming in all the time, so it's never a real known deal. And then you never totally know until the customers show up in September, how many customers you have. And so that's a big driver as well. So I think LSO, the state has done a great job we have a pretty good estimate what it is based on certain projections, like all the work we do. But, and then it gets fine-tuned through the transfer process. So it's worked incredibly well. It's saved the state and it saved us from a tax increase, certainly. And dramatic cuts, I think that would have been really scary. So I appreciate the committee's support for the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So going to page 7, this is really the same issue. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, the provision on pages 6 and 7 is the cash flow borrowing for the SFP, whereas the one on page 5 was the, when there's a deficit, there's a transfer.
Page 5 is June 30th.
Mr. Chairman, I think, there's a, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
there's a, on page 7 is the placeholder for that. I believe for the dollar amount on lines 5, 6, and 7. And again, I think, I don't think it's like many of these programs, it's not, it just depends really the makeup of each school district and when their tax payments come in. So I think, I'd move to delete this section too. I think it's worked well, and it's not a tremendous drain on anybody. It's just about how we pay our bills when cash flow issues. So that 2113-316, starting on the bottom, page 6, 7, go ahead. My motion would be to delete that, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? Second discussion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? That motion. Show of hands. All those in favor say aye. Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That motion carries. Going on to page 8. Go ahead.
So we've already done the amendment on the 9 million, but we had some questions and I reached out to the Department of Construction, Department of Health, looked back on the bill that we created that borrowing authority in 2019 for the 9 million. The Department of Health starts paying that back June 30th, the first June 30th after it's occupied. So now it's occupied, the Department of Health is starting to planning to make their first payment on this June 30th, and they have 15 years to pay that back.
So what is that, how does that directly affect what we're, on this particular line?
Nothing, we just left, we left that statute, the amendment was we left this statute just the way it currently exists. We removed it from the bill, but there are still some question on how we paid that back and what mechanisms are in place, and I just cleared that up.
Is there a motion on the?
No, we done that
Do
earlier.
we already took it out of the
Yeah,
bill?
we already done it.
Right. So now we've worked the bill, right? Anything else on the bill? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, moving on to page 10. There's the University of Wyoming student housing is in there. And I think Representative Walters has worked on this. I think staff has an amendment, and Representative Walters asked that I bring it. And really, do you have that, Mr. Fuller? Or, okay, great. So I'll just pause till this is distributed. And he asked that I bring this to the committee today. Thank you.
All right, walk us through the.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion on this amendment, and I know I have to get a second to really explain it, but it's really about making this match up with, so a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters spoke with me about this, and really we have two student housing loan programs in the LSRA. One is for community colleges, and then the other is for the University of Wyoming. And as you've driven on the campus, and the community college one's been successful, and then the University of Wyoming is this transformative project is right in the middle of it right now. And the idea is to make these two programs kind of line up and have the same interest rates, the same payback. And the issue is University of Wyoming's interest rate is about double of what the community college rate is. And they were instituted at different times. And so really what this amendment does is bring the interest rates identical to the community college student housing program, loan program out of the LSRA. And really Representative Walters, I mean, the University of Wyoming's in the Constitution. It is the state, it's part of the state. And so to have that similar makes sense. And then it'll be fully used. Right now, it's not being used. And they're using their bonding and other mechanisms, but they're going to need this at some point and would like to use it and like to get a more favorable interest rate as we loan to our university. So I think, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. But that's
Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is, so by doing this, we will then free up the university with their bonding, which is currently committed to the housing for other projects that we have actually authorized them to move forward with.
Turn this on. There it goes. I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that is part of it. I do think that it's all, and we changed statute, I don't know, when we passed that bill a few years ago, and increase FMRs, all that to increase bonding capacity. And so I think that is part of it, to get out of some more unfavorable, bonds from 20 years ago or whenever it was. But I don't know that whole story on that, but yeah. But
So
thank you.
my follow-up, if I could, I mean, I'll vote in favor of this amendment. It appears to make sense. I discussed it with Representative Walters. We will need a fiscal statement because I can read the amendment, but it doesn't really tell me what the implications are in dollars. And that's going to be, we need that, in my opinion.
So further comments. So my understanding was that UW told us that they have locked in their funding mechanism for the dorms, and they have no intention of doing anything else, and they're set to complete the dorms. And so that they don't need this provision anymore. That was what the testimony we had when, that's my recollection.
That's my recollection, and then personal conversation with the trustees too.
And so, and that's why we put this in there, because they say they don't need it anymore. And so the idea of amending it to grant something that hasn't been asked for and how it would affect or impact other projects or bonding, or if they would then go back and reevaluate their bonding mechanisms. Go ahead. That's my question is, and without doing a walkthrough and understanding what this is and how it affects it, that's what I'd like to understand. Go ahead, Representative Larson.
So, and this may be to staff on the community college side, is there can you remind me how much we have there that they can borrow against the LSRA and how much we can borrow against for the University of Wyoming? Is there a difference in the two? Could you just remind me of that?
Chairman, I think staff, this particular UW is like 49, 50 million, right? And they're making this forward.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson. So in this 2019 bill, and this is reflected on page 11 of the bill, there was one pot of $15 million, another for $34 million. Each had a slightly different purpose. The $15 million was for initial construction costs. The $34 million was for, I believe, the bond repayments. Under 2118-319 for the community colleges, I believe their authority is up to $60 million for borrowing.
Was
And
that was a
follow-up, Mr.
portion through the schools?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure about the proportional, but I know the 60 million is the aggregate amount, the maximum aggregate amount of
My
borrowing.
recollection is that only 2 schools used that, up to around 20 million, and no other ones have used it. Isn't that right?
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't speak one way or another to that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask, so I had it in my head that so you're saying total UW and community colleges is 60 million?
No.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Community colleges is 60 million. University of Wyoming's around 49 million. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, then back to staff, it sticks in my mind that Northwest and Powell had used some for dorms, and it seems like there was one other.
Laramie County
Laramie County Community College, and of that 60 million had perhaps used around 34 or something.
Mr. Chairman, I couldn't speak to that right off the top.
And do we know, and the University of Wyoming hadn't used any, and largely because of these interest rates, is the way I'm understanding.
Mr. Chairman, a real question on that too is I'm not aware, do the community colleges have bonding authority like the university can issue bonds or not? I'm not aware of any of them doing that, but I don't know. And that may
Yes.
be part of the differential.
Go ahead, Tara.
The colleges have bonding authority.
Community colleges.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I thought, don't we have a bill in JAC to close out the CC program as well as to close out the local government infrastructure borrowing program and so forth, or to severely cut those back?
I think there is a bill to basically close the community college dorm. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
and Mr. Chairman, that's the bill that the Appropriations Committee continued until December.
Yeah, I think lowering the interest rate is going the wrong way from what we want to do. It reminds me when I was on revenue and we were assigned to get rid of sales tax exemptions, and we added 2.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think the issue is really, as part of the state and our Constitution, the university, we're trying to, give favorable terms from the state to the state, and that's really the issue. And this 49 million is needed, and inflation has taken off. I think at one point they thought probably wouldn't need it, and we're going to use this as a last resort on some of this. The 15 million for startup costs was initially thought, but as you know, the parking and police part of that is done, all the groundbreaking, but this is going to be an important part. So it was requested by the university, is my understanding, through Representative Walters. He brought it to us, saw this bill and thought this would be a place to do this. So that's why, and I think he spoke to others of you here, but really the idea is to loan ourselves at a favorable interest rate. And so we can get these projects done.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and I understand that, except I wouldn't call this favorable on the opportunity cost, as we're losing money. And that money belongs to the taxpayers and all the people in the state of Wyoming, not just the University of Wyoming. And so that lost opportunity cost at these interest rates, and particularly where we're headed right now, make no sense. I mean, this is contrary to what we've talked about at our last Appropriations Committee, is to indexing these interest rates across the board based on U.S. government treasury rates. If you want a 2-year loan, you pay a 2-year treasury. That's still more favorable than anywhere else that we're going to, but it equalizes the fact that what the state treasurer invests is our short-term liquidity is a 6-month treasury or a 2-year treasury. That ought to be the opportunity cost that we lend back to the state of Wyoming. Otherwise, we're foregoing money that then funds all the other operations of government. So I agree with Senator Kinski. This is going the opposite direction in light of where we're at with interest rates right now.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just 2 points to clarify. 38 of the 60 million colleges have used. And then the other point I want to clarify is with the JAC bill, that bill concerns the investment of the PMTF in those community college bonds. It's not to get rid of.
It has to do with where to use it.
I think, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, and the opportunity cost is going to be on the front end or the back end. Because when you pay the loans back, who's paying it back? I mean, the state's paying it back. And so really, but I think as far as getting this thing moving and getting it done as quickly as it can before inflation eats all of our projects. You guys on appropriations know it better than most. You see it. So timing is really important. Move as fast as we can. And so I think that's the issue. And again, just loaning ourselves, it's right pocket to left pocket, and it'll come back to the right pocket. And so I encourage your support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Jerry? One second, please. Representative Overmule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Part of this amendment from Representative Walters, the first line 1, or page 1, line 5, he wants to delete eliminating and insert amending. So we're just kind of flipping this bill from eliminating something to amending it to be a more favorable position for the university. So we're just totally with this thing here, flipping the purpose of this bill. It just seems like a separate issue we shouldn't be dealing with this bill.
Okay.
So any thoughts?
Well, I would agree with that's what this amendment does. But my recollection is the reason we put this in here, because UW told us that it wasn't going to use these dollars and that there was no reason to keep it. If now UW has a different position, I think they need to come and present that to us so we understand what it is. But to do this, and so my suggestion is that we just strike section 4. That's the whole thing. And then so we don't fight the battle today. If in fact they want to come in and amend it, then that'll probably have to come in front of appropriations, because we're not going to be meeting again with this committee. But if we want to kick something out of and accomplish what we're doing, this will be an anchor that drags this into nowhere land. So that would be my suggestion.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I had my notes in the wrong place when we were talking about skilled nursing earlier. This is what I was talking about with the university, about wanting to see financial statements on where they are, because I've heard, and I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I heard that they weren't going to ever need this money. Now I've heard that they are going to need it. And now we're talking about flipping the interest rate. I agree with my colleagues about that concern as well, but I'm kind of concerned about this whole deal and just want to find out where we are with this. And so that's, I'd like just to see where we are financially with these projects and where they're going, and then have this discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would agree at this point in time. I mean, I had an opportunity to sit down with the president here just a week or so ago, and we went through a list of priorities, and this wasn't on there. And so, not saying that there wasn't communications to Representative Walters, but given my recent conversation, I think we just take this off the table right now. We did have a large and extensive conversation about, inflation and the cost of construction and what they're projecting, but they didn't mention loans. They were talking about direct appropriations. And so, again, I think this is, without hearing specifically from the trustees, the president, I think this is premature.
And so let's go back to the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed?
No.
The motion carries. Is there a motion to strike? Remove this from the bill. Right, yeah, motion failed. Is there a motion to strike section 4, page 10 from this bill? So moved. Is there a second? Just a second. All those in favor
Mis-
say aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so if you're repealing that section 4,
No, we're just taking it out of the bill.
so taking out of the bill, Mr. Chairman, would just leave everything as is.
Yeah, exactly.
With the understanding that UW is going to come back and tell us what they
Correct.
really want.
Yeah, correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
it's just a question. So the motion to strike section 4 on page 10, I'm assuming then we would also, I would favorable to strike section 7 on page 11.
That's the community colleges.
No, it's fine on the student housing. It's the 15 million.
Yeah, everything to do with UW.
Yeah, okay. So that's for.
Okay, everyone understand the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, that motion carried. Okay, anything else further on the bill?
You still have Hathaway.
Still Hathaway on
Still
page 12.
nursing, Hathaway and nursing.
Mr. Chairman, there is the matter on page 12. This was another subcommittee recommendation. There's currently a Hathaway cash flow borrowing authority. That's on page 12. This is from the 2022 budget bill, and there was a recommendation to impose a maximum limit on that borrowing authority.
So does the treasurer have a comment on that? I think there is a comment on it. I can't remember what it was. No? Is there a motion from the floor to put a number in? Please.
Could I ask staff if they had any recommendations based on the analysis that they did?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, I don't have any recommendations, but I do have the original memo that identified the subcommittee's 7 suggested items, if that would be helpful for people. And I was just tallying, the changes that had remained in the bill after the discussion today. And there's 2 eliminations of borrowing authority. It was the Department of Workforce Services for 20 million and the EGI for 60 million. And I think.
So let me redirect my question, Mr. Chairman. Polly, based on that memo, and I don't have it in front of me right
have
now,
copies.
what was the maximum amount that was ever used as borrowing authority for that provision?
Well, there are 3 unlimited borrowing authorities, and then,
But what's the most we've ever borrowed for Hathaway?
0. Mr. Chair.
0. We've
Yeah.
never used that borrowing authority ever.
Correct,
But right now, it's unlimited.
correct.
So this goes back to our earlier discussion that if we modify the scholarship itself, the 21-16-13-03, that would be a better source to fix this problem. Is that right? Representative Harsman?
Yeah, I don't think the problem is in the LSRA borrowing authority. Again, it's just another thing that if something happens, we've got, an account, so we pay our bills. I think that the thing where we could clean that up is really, and can't do it in this bill, I don't think, but to really reduce that to one account. And it's all a timing issue. And that bill is out there, but I don't know, and maybe Probes want to run it or something, but it's just and because to the person that doesn't really follow it, it's like, geez, what's wrong with the Hathaway? They don't have enough money in the expenditure account. They have to borrow from the reserve account. Well, because on July 1st, every year, it sweeps out, anything left over sweeps and then it tips. So there's nothing left in the expenditure account. And then they don't get revenue until October, really, into the account by the time it goes through the whole treasurer process. And so we got to dip in the reserve account every single year. You just have to. That's the way it's structured. So if we're okay with that and knowing, and we can speak to our constituents about it, the Hathaway is not in trouble. It grew by $100 million this last year. Started at 400. It's over, I don't know, nearly 900. Is it? Something, I don't know, 7, I don't know. It's crazy. But But that's a different issue for this. So I think we're fine leaving it as is, if you want, or if you want to limit it, I think is fine too. But that's not really the issue, I think, with Hathaway.
And Mr. Chairman, the one note I would add is this is from the budget bill, so this authority would only be good for this year and the subsequent year.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion?
So, Mr. Chairman, just to reiterate what I think Mr. Farmer just said, this expires at the end of the fiscal, or next fiscal year. Anyway,
So my question is, should this remain in this bill? Does it have a purpose?
Mr. Chairman, I
Go
think
ahead.
we can take it out of the bill as well, because it's going to go away anyway. And you guys put it in there for a reason and during different financial, it looked a little different a few months back. But make the bill simpler, I think.
Very simple. Yeah. So there's a motion, and there's a second?
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
no,
That motion carried. This bill is getting two pages, I think. Okay, as amended. Can we walk us through what's left?
So Mr. Chairman,
because it just run it as a.
91418 was amended, so that'll be the YDOT borrowing authority is 100 million from LISRA. 93205E, instead of being in the bill, instead of being amended, would be repealed. 94219 was deleted. 2113316.
Go ahead.
Mr. Fuller, can you just kind of tell us those statute references too as well when you're going? So YDOT, you said, and then the next one was group insurance?
That was the EGI school district authority that was, and the motion that was adopted was to repeal that subsection for the EGI borrowing.
Not eliminate it from this bill, but repeal it from current statute.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, correct.
Okay, thank you.
And then next on page 5, this was the 100 million, the transfer to bring the school foundation program to 100 million. That is deleted from the bill, so remains as is. Then on page 6, 2113316, this is the school foundation, the cash flow borrowing, that is deleted from the bill, so will stay as is. Then on page 8 and 9, that was the skilled nursing facility, that is deleted from the bill, so will stay as is. Then the bottom of 9 and then pages 10 and 11, that was the UW housing, that was deleted from the bill, so will stay as is. And then finally, page 12, the cash flow borrowing for the Hathaway, that was deleted from the bill and will stay as is.
Okay. Comments?
Question?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. So Brian, so workman's comp, which went to 0, that stayed in the bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, that's correct. That was repealed in the initial version and still is repealed.
Okay.
Okay, any public comment? I don't think I took public comment. Close public comment. Now, as amended, are we ready for a roll call vote on the bill? Roll call. As amended.
Thank you. On 23 LSO 262 as amended, Senator Driscoll.
No.
Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Hicks.
Aye.
Senator Kinski.
Aye.
Senator Nethercott.
Aye.
Representative Hallinan.
Aye.
Representative Harshman. Representative Larson. Representative Obermuller. Representative Schwartz. Vice Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
Chairman Perkin excused. Correct. We have 9 aye, 2 no, 1 excused.
House or Senate bill? Do you have a preference?
Ask the chairman.
Okay, House bill. House bill's fine. Okay, we're an hour behind. Let's take a
break.
Let's take a break and come back at 9:30. Okay, let's circle the wagons.
But that's where we are.
Okay, we're back live. Next on the agenda, we've got the Treasurer's Office update. Workflow automation updates, interfund borrowing. Come on up. Welcome again. Go ahead and proceed. Kurt?
Yeah, I'm just.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dawn Williams. I'm the Deputy State Treasurer. Hello again. I'm pleased to announce that all of our audit documents required by SAO, the State Auditor's Office, and MHP, our external auditors, have been submitted. We continue to work with those partners to answer questions. So now that all of our documents are submitted, now they start to audit them. The feedback so far is very positive, meaning we haven't had, we just had routine questions, no indications of any issues.
So Don, let's go back. Tell us what was required, what was and precisely what documents we're talking about, and is this something that was similar to what was not supplied on time last year? Just so we understand what we're talking about.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think there are roughly about, I want to say 400 PBCs, we call them, prepared by client documents, submissions that we have to make to the auditors. The problem that caused the issue last year was, as a result of the audit, as MHP started to audit all of our information, a journal entry that we used to make it was one journal entry that represented a combination of all of our managers. What they determined was that, and in prior years, that amount wasn't material. So as far as material to the audit, it's an audit term of materiality. As they audited the the information last year, they determined that they wanted those journal entries to be made by individual manager, rather than one journal entry that represented a group of the managers. They wanted each manager broken out. We have about 70 managers. So that took time to unwind the journal entry. That's why we were late. That's why so it wasn't that that number had not been submitted. It was that as a result of the audit process, we were asked to do something different than we had been required to do before. So this year, we included those journal entries by manager as a part of the audit process, and submitted those journal entries by manager this year, so that we shouldn't have that issue this year.
Okay. And so
Yeah,
that's what you're
Mr.
talking
Chairman.
about in terms of your, so tell us exactly what was submitted. Just explain it a little more so I understand.
Oh, gosh, Mr. Chairman, there are so many documents that are submitted, and I think Katie's online, actually, so I might phone a friend.
Katie
But
is on phone, yeah.
Oh, great. Hi, Katie. Would you like to see if you can sum up about 400 PBCs in a couple of minutes?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Deputy. I'm Katie Smith, Administrator of Financial Accounting for the Treasurer's Office. Thank you to the committee. So the PBCs, yes, 400 roughly, give or take a few. The compilation is across the board, honestly. So we submit everything from our receipts desk. So the receipts that we've taken in, our PPI program, public purpose investments, the TDOA program, time deposit on account, all of our investment earnings, anything that we've distributed out by fund, not just by pool, but by fund. We also submit all of our information on bonds, so any of the bonds that we're currently managing. We also submit all the PBCs for every single directive that has ever been signed throughout the fiscal year, which is quite a bit of activity. We also submit in-kind analysis, so any of the in-kinds. Now, as you guys have known, we stopped that starting in December. We no longer have done those since December 2021. However, we do an in-kind analysis, a new PBC in the past few years. We also submit all of our balancing in our investment accounting software, as well as our cash flow balancing. So that's what we call a yellow book, an inside look at some of the stuff that we do. And that's where we take the depository bank and the custodian bank and we reconcile the cash flows. So we submit all of those. We submit every single bond statement, going back to bonds. We submit all of the journal entries, like she had just explained, the deputy. In the past, it was a one lump sum. However, now we're submitting those by manager, every single type of, and we're actually submitting the journal entry, which is not common. Treasurer's office has not been required to submit that. That is something that the ACFR group always did, but we're submitting those to help with transparency and everything. We also submit, any of investment statements that are needed, any of the discrepancies that we might find. So each one of those journal entries, just to give you a little bit higher look, is we have an audit trail for each one. So if there's a journal entry, I'm providing a slew of documents to support that particular journal entry and why we're booking it. So if that was our statement issue with the investment manager, a discrepancy with the custodian, etc. So that's why that one becomes so time intensive and new, and a new PBC. We also submit all the GASB 40, 53, and 72 requirements. So that's foreign credit risk, that is interest rate risk, that is also the schedule of investments, that's all of the NAV reporting. So we are also doing all of those things and then having to tick and tie all of those reports together so that we can then submit a Note 3 draft. So we support the entire Note 3 of the financial report and we submit a draft of that every year. And we articulate all of the financials in there. That also includes WildStar 1 and WildStar 2. So we also submit all of the reconciliations and GASB 40, GASB 72, and 53 reporting for those as well. And then again, schedule of investments is kind of the tie up, the end all be all by asset category that we do. We do have some documents that, so packet information, something that you guys see, there's back end documents that actually support the packet that we submit on the website. Those are also submitted for audit. And so just a slew, and it's funny, off the top of my head, I'm drawing blanks, but those are just some high level areas in which we do report. It's a lot of information, a lot to take on. They have plenty to chew on right now, so.
And so Katie and/or Don, your ability to submit those and your new accounting system, what's the relationship? I mean, is that facilitate your ability to do it in terms of your back office activities? And so just explain that if you want.
Mr. Chairman, no, the accounting system, unfortunately, we haven't been able to reap the benefits of that quite yet. We're doing it currently, but that didn't go live until July 1st. So we were heavy duty in building that and revamping our chart of accounts right before we hit audit season. So we have not been able to see the benefits of that. I'm very anxious to see how it turns out for the next audit. But the most primary reason why we were able to be so efficient this year is the staff. I have more people and I have people who have been seasoned. I have people who have been through an audit once or twice now with the state treasurer's office, which is a very unique experience. And so that has been the benefit. I have a great group of people, accounting professionals that are extremely bright and that have been able to provide those PBCs to me cleaner and faster so that the heavy burden isn't so much on me.
Okay, questions for Katie?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, I got a letter from you the other day that that kind of was disturbing to me a little bit. You told me that in the letter that I continue to have a lack of confidence in you guys, what you're all doing over there, and I kind of felt bad about that. I don't mean to have a lack of confidence. Just the last 3 years have given me that lack of confidence. And as I go back through, and I'm glad to hear that these things are getting straightened out. No one is more excited about that than I am. I don't want to see another report come out 6 months late. And so that was where you're perceived that I was lacking confidence. That's where that came from. And I've tried, and I think this committee's tried to do, or appropriations especially, has tried to do whatever we can to help. So what I want to do is go back to the audit, since you mentioned it. On page 23 of the audit, they talk about the adjustments to those entries. Is that what you were talking about just now? And maybe Katie, you can help me with that. That was the repeat finding that they've shown as a material finding year over year. Is that what you're talking about on page 23 of the report?
Deputy, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman and Senator Guru, yes, that repeat finding was it's a compilation of a couple of things. It's timing. There's a lot of timing talk in there about, I believe that's the one that you're looking at, is the timing regarding how fast we're able to, one, not only find the issues, but two, be able to fully transparently report every single entry at manager level. So yes, that would be part of that finding. So last year, obviously, was a new request. We did it, but it was late. So it was, again, a timing efficiency type materiality request. That's how we got that finding.
Okay, and if I can follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
On page 25 of the report, it also talks about 3 adjustments to journal entries related to revenues that resulted when certain unique transactions were not properly identified at values such as repayments and related to loans receivable or appropriations. Is that kind of in the same ballpark what you're talking about?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman and Senator Gru, I would have to go back. I don't have the single audit in front of me, but there were journal entries that I think were misplaced in the ACFR process due to loans receivable. And so that wasn't part of the investment by manager things that was having to do with the loans receivable. And something to take into consideration is every time the audit is done, new things are resurfacing, right? So, they're looking at different things from a different angle. They're doing those things. So we're doing all of our best work to try to avoid that. But that was one of those things that kind of fell out in that particular audit that year, not something that was normal to be found.
Okay, and so, well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I appreciate you helping me understand those reports. And to the Deputy Treasurer, I would say, I look forward to having my confidence restored. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Guru, so do I. I think we're proving it, and that's what I've been, so I think we're proving it day by day. It doesn't, you hear that adage about turning a ship. It doesn't happen overnight, and we've been turning a ship, and I feel like we have demonstrable positive results that we can show you, and that we're keeping on doing that. So back to the audit. Since we have submitted our documents, our focus now will be on our accounting system upgrade. That's another area where I think we've really achieved some good things. We started that back in January. On July 1st, we implemented our first phase. The reason we did it in phases is because we knew there was no way we could complete a whole accounting system revamp in 6 months, but we wanted to have something because we told you we would. And so we did, and we met that deadline. And now we planned for that project to be sort of on hiatus while we got our audit documents submitted. So it hasn't died. Katie has certainly been involved with Jeanette, who is our project manager, on working on that. And we have, as you can see in those workflow automation reports that we submit to you monthly, that we have our project phase 2 plan in place, and we are and have been working on some of that, but we'll ramp it up now. Katie this week already has hours and hours scheduled. Jeanette has blocked out every available hour on her calendar to be able to get back to that project. And so we're looking at another year, but that really is normal. And so we're going to do it right, we're going to do it well, and we're going to keep working on it.
So just to follow up on that, a couple of different things. First of all, you said that it's been on hiatus while you're preparing to submit the materials for the audit. How long how much man hours and how many days or months does it take you to get ready to submit all those materials that we just talked about, the 400 plus reports?
Oh gosh, Mr. Chairman, Katie and her team, we start actually preparing in March, and the full-on deadline, we work solid July, August, September, October, solid.
And so how many people do you have working on it? Katie and who?
Well, her whole team does parts of it. So because we still have to do day-to-day business as well. So, but her whole team is working on it. I don't think you have any, Katie, please correct me if I'm wrong. You don't have anybody that doesn't touch it. Is that right?
Which is how many people, Katie, and how many, I think it helps us if we understand how much work there is and how many people are doing it. And if, because that's, so we need to understand your office better.
Okay, Katie, would you like to go ahead and say?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Deputy, as well. So I have 13 staff. 13 staff during the audit. I just hired 2 more people, yay. But 13 people currently, everybody's hands are in the pot. So of all those 13, everybody has a piece and part in it. So how it works, how I structure it is I have a lot of my principal accountants, senior accounting analysts, the staff really doing the bulk of the preparation for those PBCs. I like that to then filter through to my managers who do a lot of the review process as well, so that by the time it gets to me, hopefully it's pretty darn clean and I can do a quick review. So everybody's participating in that. I have been preparing probably more than my fair share this year. Each year it gets better and better, but that will be trickling down now that we're restructured into a 3-unit type of division, where I have my treasury side, my investment ops, and my recon audit unit. That unit their primary focus will be doing a lot of that audit work as well. Long time coming, but we're getting there. And so some of the work that I am doing currently, so say for those new PBCs, right, the new stuff that is being required, I'm fine tuning that process so I can hand that over to my staff so that they can do it. I'll still be a part of the review process. So everybody's hands are in the pot. Everybody's looking at different things. As the deputy said, we really start preparing in March. May, April, June kind of gets a little bit hairy with year end. But then starting July 1st, it's all hands on deck. We have continual audit deadlines starting in July through October, depending on the particular project that's due. And then I stagger the PBC list according to kind of bandwidth. So I know who's busy when, and so we try to take care of some of our deadlines that I know that that's kind of a lull in their day-to-day process and vice versa. So we try to just stagger it across so that we can make sure that we're keeping things rolling and we're keeping things done and also staying afloat on the day-to-day.
And so then, Katie, how much of that time is related to the in-office investment team versus your other responsibilities in the treasurer's office?
Mr. Chairman, so the units, every unit supports the in-house investments, right? I mean, everybody's touching that, whether it's whether it's doing cash movements, to reconciling out the managers, to distributing the funds, all those investment earnings, everybody's touching it in some capacity. I would say that's the majority of our work. The majority of what we do is to support investments and do whatever we can to make them successful. However, we do have the treasury side of what we do, which is all the deposits, interfund loans, bonds, PPIs, TDOA. All of those things are still part of the core of what we do as well. The pass-through distributions. We do all the cities and towns for severance, for lottery, for all of those different types of things. So we're still trying to keep that section, that's still going, but everybody, no matter what unit you're in, you're touching some part of the investment process of the state treasurer's office.
Well, let me just rephrase it another way. My understanding was that other than the in-house investment folks, your staff was adequate to do your general accounting services for the treasurer's office. But what sets you behind is the in-office investing. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. I mean, as we've grown, just the investment distributions is something that the Treasury unit side handles. That's obviously grown with that. Spending policy is something that they handle as well. So all I'm saying is everybody's hands are touching it. However, yes, the core of the backstop was obviously not having enough principal accountants and accounting professionals to handle those manager reconciliations, to handle the internal trades, to handle those processes that we needed to get lifted off of the ground, handling plan sub accounting, right? Making sure that that was adequate and actually working functionally.
Mr. Chairman, just may I interject? Katie, when the chairman is talking about internal investments, he's talking about like Seth and Fung and the private equity or the public equity. When we talk about internal investments, we're talking about our team. We're internally investing. So that's meaning whether we're doing our equity trades or we're talking about hiring managers, with our real estate, our private equity, all of that. So when we talk internal investments, that's what we mean. And is that not fair, Katie? Because I think when you talk about internal investments, it was for the build out. And yes, we needed more people and got more people for that. But as the whole portfolio has grown, our accounting team did not keep up. There's a lot of money to keep track of, and it's not all tied into public equity or into the equity investments. So I just wanted to clarify.
In terms of the diversified portfolio. Go ahead, Kurt.
And the addition of the Bloomberg has helped a lot as far as the internal trading, because that's automated it and taken a lot of I guess day-to-day people time off of it, because you used to just basically, we were back in the 1990s or 1980s.
Yeah, working off of Excel spreadsheets, basically.
Yeah, so that has really helped, I think, and has freed up Seth and Fung so they can actually do the job that they were hired to do. So the advent of technology is helping across all sectors.
Okay, so in terms of the build out and then what you anticipate to have, when everything will be up and running by July 1st, right?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think we have a year from now, probably January 1st of 2024. For our accounting system, is that what you meant?
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's, so what has to happen then? Tell us what's going to happen between now and January 24.
Katie, would you like to talk about that? You and Jeanette have been working on that.
Yes, absolutely, Deputy. Mr. Chairman, so currently we're in finishing up phase 1 and into phase 2. Phase 2 is primarily focused on let me step back. Phase 1 was the chart of accounts. We restructured how we're using the system in phase 1. So that was a huge lift. We shuffled the deck, put it out, and actually are able to utilize the system the way it was intended. It's not as customized now. So that's great because now we are able to use all of these different tools that the system has to offer. Phase 2 is far more into the reporting realm. So a lot of these things that we're doing in our doing for our spreadsheets and things like that, the system should be able to generate those at a snap of a finger, right? This one button push thing that the treasurer talks about quite often. So we're working on those. We're working to test and vet a lot of those processes in phase 2 so that those reports are going to be something that we can pull out of the system, reconcile quickly, and have it rocking and rolling. Help automate and officiate a lot of the work that we do. Phase 3 is going to be going into more of, okay, where can we then fine tune and even add more layers of efficiency? So a directives module is one of those things that we've been looking at. Having something where instead of having a paper directive, having something where you can automatically put the directive in and it can post. And my staff is doing more analytics, not data entry, right? Getting away from the data entry component and actually letting them be accountants a lot of the time, where they can do analytics, they're not having to juggle both. So doing directives is going to be a huge thing. Also having managers submit their information to our accounting system directly so that we can take the manager statement and the custodian statement and be a third-party check. That is something that we have strived to do manually. It is extremely time intensive. Every manager does it a slightly different, and every asset class reports slightly different. So it's constantly having to maneuver and figuring out those nuances. However, the system has the ability to take in all of that manager data, literally handle the accounting mechanisms of it, and then we can take the JP Morgan reports and reconcile those out on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis, which would be huge for us because quite often we get bogged down into the weeds because there's discrepancies between the two. So that would be a huge push forward, and we're already starting on that. Even though that's not till phase 3, because we've had some lulls and different things, I can delegate out a couple hours here and a couple hours there to kind of get the ball rolling on some of these other things that maybe we don't have the bandwidth to do now because we're in the audit. So I have, we're working with kind of a template of information we want to get from the managers, a subset of managers to get that ball rolling. So those are kind of all those advantages. The system's working great. It's been a big push and a big lift, but it's already making things a lot easier. So at every phase, we just get more and more efficient, more and more automated. So it's just building on what we have already set at this point. So it seems like a lot to do, but we're really close. And this is just polish. I look at this as just being polished on the system.
Mr. Chairman, I would add too, when Katie's talking about reporting, that's what Jeanette's been working on while the audit's been going on. She's been making sure as what she understands what the reporting that we need. What the lull has been is that Katie hasn't been able to come, her team haven't been able to do the testing. And so now that their team is more available, we'll start testing those reports. So the work didn't stop. It just went to a little bit of a lull because we had to focus on meeting those deadlines. And then the other thing she actually addressed this about the managers in phase. We're already working on those too, those as well, having those managers reporting their data directly. There's a lot of them to coordinate. As I mentioned, we have about 70 managers. And so the time that's going to take is directly related to those folks' how easy they are to work with and get that. However, I have a little backup plan, and that's Patrick. Anything that we have, those managers work for us, he tells me all the time. So we anticipate that, I'm hopeful that that will not be as difficult a process as it might be because of my muscle back there. So that's what we're working on. We're gonna, and we did it, we kind of talked about this in phases just because we knew we were gonna have to do the ebb and flow according to our workflow, our work schedule.
Okay, questions? Please proceed.
All right, so I do want to make you aware, usually I give you a nice, an update on personnel and to know, with where we are. So the investment division, we lost our senior investment officer. However, we have found a replacement. He cannot start for us until the beginning of next year because he currently lives in Germany. And in Germany, you have to give a 3-month, who knew, you have to give a 3-month notice. In America, our standard is 2 weeks, his is 3 months. So we have a person lined up and we're looking forward for him to start. It just won't be for a couple more months. We lost an analyst in Patrick's team, but we replaced him with one of our accounting team. So while Patrick gained, the accounting side lost, the treasurer's office wins either way. But that does mean that we now have 2 principal accountant positions open, and we did lose one of our senior accountant positions. We filled our legal assistant position that we had, but then as you know, Lisa left. Recently, we proposed to HR that they reclassify our attorney positions to their right now, they were at a level 4 to a level 5, just sort of commensurate more with the level of responsibility that they have. And we were successful. And just today that reclassified 5 position has been released. So we look forward to being able to fill that. The treasurer does anticipate submitting a letter to the Joint Appropriations Committee requesting funding so that if we're able to fill that position and for the position that we currently have, so that we can bring those attorneys to the midpoint of the classification, of the new classification. So we do anticipate, like I say, giving you a letter, getting the JAC a letter to request additional
By
funding.
putting that person at the midpoint, then theoretically that person will have background to hit the ground running.
Mr. Chairman, yeah. Right now, we struggle at the pay level that we offer to attract the talent that we need for that position. It's probably still too low, frankly, at the midpoint, but it's certainly better than what we're paying now, because right now we're paying at the top, the max of the 4. Yeah. So. Oh, and also we did contract with Lisa to fill in those gaps for our investment team until we can get that position refilled. The COO position classification is being revised.
And so where did she go?
Lisa, she went to private practice.
So she's contracting through you from her private practice?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
And just curious, how much more does she make as a contractor?
Mr. Chairman, it's significantly more. I would say 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah, at least twice. Let's see, Mr. Chairman, the COO position classification is being revised per the JAC's recommendation. I think my understanding is that ANI is going to create a classification. The COO was sort of jammed into the CIO classification, and it just wasn't a fit. So I think they were amenable to your suggestion to create a new classification. And the intention, from what I understand, is to have that ready for us on Monday, so in a week from today, because we do have an IFC meeting next week, a quarterly meeting that we'll need to visit with those folks about. We have been, in the meantime, I had this post on LinkedIn, and then we've gotten a lot of interest through that. We've gotten some interest through members of IFC who have recommended folks to us. So we are generating some interest, and we'll have some things to chat with the IFC about and how they want to proceed with that process.
And so have you provided, it would be nice if whatever ANI comes up with and what you submitted, that before the IFC meeting, that they can have a chance to review it so they can comment on it and maybe make sure that that it fits the mold of what you need, but so we don't keep spinning the wheels.
Well, Mr. Chairman, before we submitted our job description to A&I, it went through IFC. So the job description that we gave to A&I had already been approved and seen and made, the IFC was aware of that. The problem was in how A&I then subsequently classified what we submitted to them. So I feel like IFC knew what.
Okay.
Let's see.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Don. I'd like to go back to the attorney thing. And my question is when we have in-house attorneys, we're such and such, but then when we go outside, do we put an RFP out and do a bid process, then to do those services? And was that done with Lisa's firm?
Mr. Chairman, ordinarily we do an RFP, and we do have one with Jackson Walker. That's a firm that is out of Texas that we used for complicated material terms and reference. As for Lisa's, no, we did not. We did a bid exception request for that because we have work that needs to be done that she was familiar with. She was in the middle of 3 new manager cases, and so yeah, we did a bid exception request, plus she is half the price of Jackson Walker, even at her new rate. No, she's half.
So how long is that contract? I mean, at some point, and I understand that you're an emergency, but it seems to me like you would still go out with an RFP and solicit bids for professional services. Why you, and you know, unless you're thinking that we're going to get an in-house attorney soon, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's right. Yep, this is designed specifically to be temporary while we have this position advertised and get one hired.
So then, Mr. Chairman, can you define temporary for me?
Mr. Chairman, her contract expires June 30th of 2023, and we're hopeful that we won't utilize her through the entire contract term. So, Mr. Chairman, that's about 7 more months.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we don't just do investments in the Treasurer's Office. So as I'm doing a Treasurer's Office update for you, I wanted to tell you that Bill Pilger, who's our General Counsel now, and Jeff Robertson, who is our Administrator of Unclaimed Property, worked very hard on a bill to suggest revisions to our unclaimed property statutes, which have not been updated since 1993. Bill testified in front of corporations, but in the end, the committee decided to table the bill until the next interim, because it's a complex bill. And, but they did work really hard, and we're going to be positioned to take another go at it next interim.
So what's the crux of the bill?
The crux of the bill is just to update the unclaimed property language to accommodate things like cryptocurrency, electronic, like ACH, that's not even in the 1993 language, and really that's all it is updating, modernizing the language of that. So, but it's extensive, you know, there's a lot of pages to the law.
So my question is, did they just receive it and so they didn't have time to digest it or understand it, or what's?
Mr. Chairman, that's right. It was on the list of interim topics, but it wasn't put on the agenda to be considered until October. And so at that point, the committee felt like it didn't have enough time to properly address such a complex topic. So we'll keep at that one, but I just wanted to acknowledge it.
No harm done. It's
No.
just a matter of updating.
That's right. And this is also a busy time of year, Mr. Chairman and committee, for our unclaimed property folks. In November, is when all of the holders of the funds that are held that folks are holding on behalf of our citizenry turn them over to us. And so we take in all of that in November, and our folks continue to churn out payments and set records on collections and returns. They're doing a really fantastic job. They have a focus on, they really try to spend every minute searching out folks to, you know, mostly they focus on the higher amounts, you know, the higher dollar amounts, but really work on trying to conduct outreach.
That's why they don't call me.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman. or me. But we always encourage you to go to MyCashYO and see if you have anything there, because we get money every year from new, every year we get new money. So just because you looked last year doesn't mean this year you don't have anything there. And so, Mr. Chairman, that is our update as far as office. I know the next item on the agenda is to also speak about, we had told you to update you on the timeline of the total return strategy. And what we had told you from the last meeting that we would do in between meetings is to conduct a meeting with our Pool A participants. And so we did that. We had 2 meetings in October. We tried to have times where they could come. If you couldn't do one, you could do the other. And we had great turnout. Everybody came. Someone from every agency, from every account, except UW. And really, we invited them cursorily. They do not have any funds in Pool A, but they do have reserve accounts. As you know, essentially those reserve accounts will be treated the same as the Pool A accounts. We'll have 100, we're creating we have a total return, and then we have, what's my lingo here? After we talked to you after the last meeting, we thought we needed to have 6 pools. And the one other pool that the liquid, the total rate of return liquid fund, so that, because we have to have it somewhat, it can't be tied up for 15 years in private equity, right? Because at some point in a Pool A account, there could be a need for those funds to be expended, because those accounts, many of them are statutorily inviolate, they aren't inviolate funds. So they might have a reason to be accessed sooner than one that is in an account that is in the total rate of return fund. So that would be all of our Pool A accounts, and all of our reserve accounts would be in that TRR, because we got to be able to spend the TRR liquid fund so that we can expend. So we explained all of that to those folks. Essentially for them, Pool A people, the participants, their participation will not change. Their return will not change. We'll continue to invest their funds, but the way we explained it to them is we didn't want to be talking about investment of funds. And when you hear Pool A come up and you don't know what we're talking about, we want you to be fully informed of what's going on and what the changes are proposed to be, so that they can be, and then we did invite them to come to this meeting to express any concerns or if they have any questions. So I feel like that went well. We did mention one thing that might have gotten some people, in our preference with Pool A in general, regardless of whether we do a total return strategy, is that Pool A funds be that you have a minimum of $5 million to invest in Pool A. One of the Pool A accounts here has $106,000. And as you know, Pool A accounts are statutorily, so I'm sure it was very important to a legislator and the body, for instance, for that matter, because it passed. But to invest $106,000 the same way that you're investing, $113 million for the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund, the economies of scale are.
So I have a question about that. I mean, once you're fully integrated into the new software systems, I would think it wouldn't make any difference. I mean, that's what
Mr. Chairman, so the chances, I think the reason is like this, the chances of utilization of the $106,000 are greater than utilization of the $113 million. There's just a bigger buffer in $113 million. They have an expenditure account. So maybe it's not an appropriate account by definition for the Pool A account. That's all we were getting to, because of the nature of Pool A. Pool A is going to be in longer term investments. Definitely not 15-year investments. But they are going to be longer term. And so the idea that the least amount, the $106,000 is more likely to be accessed more readily, more often than perhaps $113 million. It's just a thought we had.
So,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if you're going to follow up, but I got a question I want to backtrack on.
Well, I'm just trying to think. We had discussions about Pool A, that with money on your ability to go in and go out. And there needed to be a time horizon on that. And we talked about 2 to 5 years. I'm vaguely remembering it, but so how does it work now?
Well, Mr. Chairman, right now, we haven't had anybody request any money out of their Pool A account that I'm aware of.
Since it was created?
I think that's true. I'm looking at Katie, but I think that's true. Katie?
Not recently, sorry, Mr. Chairman and Deputy, not recently. I don't know historically, like since they ever came into Pool A's changed dramatically. I mean, it started with 5 funds, now we're at 15. So I would have to go back and historically look if there's been any withdrawals out of any of those funds that have since been moved in there, but not recently. No, it's not common.
And are there guidelines of, if you take a certain percentage of your funds, put them in Pool A, in terms of when they can withdraw? Or a policy?
No, Mr. Chairman, and that is what we would like to, that's one of the things that we talked about exploring as we moved into this, just to have some more formality around that.
So, Mr. Chairman, for clarification on that, when you say there's been no withdrawals, is that no withdrawals of the original deposits? Or does that include their returns, or are they taking distributions on the returns from Pool A? So there's two different things there going on. And so which, are they doing both, or?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. And Senator Hicks, thanks for that question. So with these larger accounts, they not only have their trust account that's invested in Pool A, but the earnings are generally deposited into an expenditure account that resides in the state agency pool. So they have a separate account. So when we do those distributions, that's what we're doing. We're saying whatever statute says, wherever those earnings are directed, some accounts, you have 50% of the earnings go back to the corpus of the trust, 50% go to the expenditure account, maybe 100% goes to the expenditure account. Maybe they don't have an expenditure account, it all goes into the trust. Each one of the funds is different. And that's what Katie's team parses out every month, is when we do those distributions. So
For clarifications, there will be distributions, but it's coming out of the earnings account.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes,
Okay,
So
generally.
I think it might be helpful to describe for everyone, refresh our memories on what Pool A is, when it was created, and how much funds are in it, and what the general guidelines of who gets to be in it.
Mr. Chairman, I don't,
Do you have that off the top of your head?
Mr. Chairman, I can tell you that there's $336 million in Pool A, while Patrick's coming here. And I'll pass it. I don't know what year that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Patrick Fleming, the CIO for the Treasurer's Office. So Pool A was originally started, I believe, in about 2017 or 18. It was originally the Tobacco Settlement Trust Fund. That was where it was started. And then we started adding the various funds from there that had the wherewithal to be able to, or the size to have the ability to stay in longer duration, longer term, who would not need the funds for operating expenses. That was kind of the criteria that we used. And then the legislature put forth that it would have to be approved by the legislature to be put into the fund. As Don mentioned, the problem with it, 108,000 or what have you, it's an issue, and 5 million was kind of an arbitrary number, but there's an issue not so much on the valuation or whatever, but as you know, those long duration assets that are very liquid, if you had a drawdown of 25% or what have you, you're not able to go in and subsequently reduce those amounts of securities without doing an in-kind transfer, which we can't do anymore. So if you look at it, you're overweighted to various assets when you have that type of a discrepancy. So it just doesn't make sense to have very small funds that are set into the asset allocation distribution. Did that answer your question about where it started from and where it came from?
If there are folks that want to, with smaller dollars, then is there a need for some other type of a fund that is essentially, kind of like you know, a fund that that you would go into if you're in you know, it's like a Fortune 500 fund where you just put your money in there and that trades at its own value. But then it's large enough that, you know, they can invest in the Fortune 500s so that it's more of a accounts so they would have the same opportunity, in other words, to go onto the market with those dollars versus not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that we do not have that ability at this time within that structure. We do have the WildStar 1, 2, and potentially WildStar 3 if Amendment A passes or what have you for the local municipalities. I don't know if there was anything that you would be able or willing to do to where they could do that.
And the question is there a need or is there a value?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so back to your original question, you know, the original purpose is to a little bit further horizon, but Don, you mentioned establishing a sixth account. Would that address the chairman's concerns? In other words, something that's a little more liquid for these smaller accounts or not?
Mr. Chairman, I think that, you know, always the goal is to maximize the return, and I think that this would be a fine mechanism. The problem with investing in Fortune 500 is the risk associated. And the reason we have these folks in Pool A is because their risk tolerance is much lower than a Fortune 500 investment requires a person to have. I think obviously we would probably grandfather the folks that are already in Pool A, and we would, you know, nothing would change for these folks. But we mention it to say that when you're thinking about this in the future, maybe think about the size of the investment in the fund and whether it makes sense to have it in Pool A. The other thing that Patrick has talked about before is how we plan to revise our to invest the SAP into the corporate bonds, corporate treasuries, I mean, which will also garner a higher percentage of earnings. Is that Freddie's?
Corporate trend.
Corporate treasuries.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's the other point, good point that Don raises. At the time when we were really looking at this, we were kind of caught in that zero interest rate policy. And so right now, so for 3-month money is, you know, yielding slightly above 4%. So it's a very different situation from where we were at that time. But the delineation that we had picked at that time was funds that these entities did not need for multiple years. And so all of those larger game and fish or what have you, the ones that had the ability and didn't need the use of those funds, it was segregated out. And so, you know, the amount of money that we're talking about on 109,000 by being into this versus a 4% is de minimis. And on the operational side and trying to manage this and go through a very diverse portfolio, as you know, it is problematic from whether it's Pool A or any individual or what have you. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for those types of individuals or entities to be into these asset classes from our standpoint.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I found out when I was up in Gillette at the county commissioners or county officers one is that they're, and I can't recall whether it's WildStar 1 or 2, but they had one of the larger holders withdrew, and some of the losses actually were delegated back to the people that retained that. And so what we want to look at is a policy, I believe, where if you withdraw your funds and a loss occurs, that you take that loss. The same thing if you withdraw your funds and there's a profit on those, that you take that profit. But whatever your actions are, really, they're not visited on the remaining shareholders. And I would guess probably by the time we get through with phase 2, looking at phase 3 in our accounting, that we'll be able to unitize these things and be able to do it by unit, which will make the accounting a lot easier, but also possibly give us some flexibilities that necessarily we really don't want to jump into today. So that, I think, will help us out quite a little bit in about a year and a half from now, because our accounting system is capable of doing that. But it just we first have to get everything else running before we look at that type of thing. And I think you'll see a lot more flexibility in some of these other areas.
And so just, I think it might be helpful to remind the committee, explain what WildStar 1 and 2 is, so that, and how it's invested.
WildStar 1 was the original idea where we'd have local municipalities that would be able to invest with the state and receive some of those lower fees that would be associated with it. So if they choose to, they could have what would be equivalent of a money market security. And then at that time, Governor Gordon, then treasurer, said, okay, well, let's see if we can get something a little bit better than money market instruments. And so we started what was called WildStar 2, which would then be security investment grade corporate bonds, 1 to 3 year maturity, so very short maturities, into a corporate bond that's yielding something more, a higher yield, a little bit more risk. Investment grade securities would have a little bit more risk, but not much. And at that time, they looked at whether or not you could then go into your S&P 500 type of securities on the equity side, and that was deemed at that time it was unconstitutional. We needed a constitutional amendment, and so that's why this Amendment A is on the ballot now, to see whether it's worthwhile to have these entities then to be able to do, which would, I assume, called WildStar 3, which would be large cap US stocks.
How much is in WildStar 1 and 2?
Do you know that? Mr. Chairman, Katie, do you know the balance in WildStar 1 and WildStar 2?
Not off the top of my head, Deputy, but I can look right now.
Somewhere in our report, isn't it?
I think one of the things that might help us when we look at WildStar 1 and WildStar 2 is that WildStar 1 is actually used kind of almost like a passbook checking account with a interest function to it.
Interest-bearing checking account.
And that's a lot of transactions. It would be a lot easier, I think, on us if we could make, quarterly distributions from any of those accounts. So people aren't, writing a check for less than $100 and then depositing less than $100 the next day. It gets to be, time consuming, I would say. And the actual benefit is, the relative benefit to that service, we hard to see the value in it.
Well, that's kind of part of what my question is are they using it as a checking account versus a savings account? Because it's kind of really wasn't the intent.
Right, Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what they're doing, and that is we have almost a full-time person associated with WildStar now. So we're in the process of preparing some rule revisions to tighten that up. But we have to do rules. And so Lisa prepared the rules before she left, and now we need to go through that process. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how close Katie is, but that concludes our update from the Treasurer's Office.
Further questions? And go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And really, any of you, just a quick question about the Wildlife Trust Fund. It's a statutory fund, right, not a constitutional fund. And how do you, invest that? Is it any different than any? I can't remember, does it have a reserve account and all that? Did we set it up like that, or is it just a fund that's kicking off interest?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harsman, no, that would not have a reserve account. That has a slight difference in a risk profile. So the permanent funds that we have are determined, I believe, by statute, or is it SLIB, that you have a 22% loss potential within a 3 standard deviation degree of, so basically once in 100 years, you would assume that you're going to lose approximately 22%. We know it's higher than that, but that is the confidence interval. So put it into perspective, those would be the large funds. Pool A would have that 20% instead of a 22%. So just a slightly less risk perspective than a permanent fund. So as we were building it up and speaking to the participants, they expressed concern about taking too much risk right off the bat, and so they preferred to have a go slow approach, and that's basically how we've done it with Pool A participants.
So in essence, that means it's an income fund.
No, Mr. Chairman, it is not an income fund like the 2 income focused funds would be Common School and your higher education because of the need for the income. Pool A still has more risk, but doesn't have that same income focused. But it would be more diverse, but just not quite as much equity exposure.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
How's it paid out, quarterly or?
As far as the returns, it would be as income coming through, when we have income that would come through. But Katie, when do you pay it? Monthly? Dawn? Okay.
Okay.
Just a question on the Wildlife Trust Fund then, is it in Pool A or is it, okay, so that's really and the whole corpus, the 210 million or whatever. Okay.
Do they have a SAP?
An expenditure.
Correct. Yeah, so they would
That's
have
what I
an
was
SAP.
wondering. There is an
Exactly.
expenditure account with that.
Yes.
Kicks off what up to, is it 5% spending policy on that too?
No spending policy.
Oh, no spending policy, okay. So
So
we never
Ms.
really constructed that like other.
No, Mr.
accounts.
Chairman, and the legislature, the agency requests expenditure, or expenditure authority through the budget process and
Sure.
for their grants. and
Yeah,
that's-
I just couldn't remember if we had, expenditure account. Okay,
No,
thank you.
but it's based upon what's in their expenditure account.
Mhm.
And just another promo for constitutional change, that would be another example of why we need a constitutional change because of this income. We could have 100% return, and yet you might only be able to spend 1% of it because of our definition of income. So it gets back to that constitutional change in the enabling act that the senator is working on. But that would, if you had that change, just like these other states, then we wouldn't have a need for any of these other things that we're going through.
But on that particular fund, it's a statutory fund, so we could change that definition by statute.
Its fund is inviolate, I believe. By statute? By statute's inviolate? Okay.
Statutorily involved.
Okay, it's inviolate. So that in our meetings with them, they've said, well, we have these different projects that we would like to
Large
be able to
scale.
spend on, just like all of you have, the same situation. And they're not able to because they don't have that assurity of how much income that they're going to have over these years. And so it's no different from, what all of you face or what these other entities face, but having that assurity of income over time would be wonderful for everyone.
That's where I'm kind of going with this thing, and I don't know if this bill's broad enough to bring that in, do a little magic work on it through the amendment process, but I agree. So there is no, and I'm just trying to work on a failing memory, but there is no spending policy on the Wildlife Trust Fund then.
Correct.
It just, all income flows in that expenditure account, you appropriate what you want, and the rest goes back into the corpus. Okay.
Representative Larson?
So, Mr. Chairman, you'll recall that a couple of years ago, we changed that to where the director could, if they didn't use all of their investment income, that they could put it back in the corpus. So that give them the ability to grow that a little bit, but no spending policy. And we had been supplementing that because we had not grown that to the level that we did this last year. Putting that money in last year, the intent was then it would negate the necessity of putting general funds in because they should be able to generate enough revenue off investment if we can get some of these tweaks done, that'll make that more probable. And this amendment A, I think is a big deal. But I think having that ability, they've got some flexibility. It's unlike education. There will always be more projects than there are revenues to take care of the projects, but they can take the revenues that they make, do what they can with them, and there's not some constitutional requirement or anything that they have to spend an exact amount to get this done. And so that kind of leaves some flexibility for that commission and Director Budd to do it. They would like to, of course, fund more and do more, but.
Well, Mike, and Mr. Chairman, where I'm kind of going with this is, you know, we've got this one-time opportunity to save some money and build these reserve accounts, and I'm just thinking of that fund. I mean, if we can make a couple little changes to create a reserve account spending policy, even though it's statutory, not constitutional, but we're getting pretty good at this, right? And mimic what we have, and then you guarantee like a 5% return on, what is it, 210 million in there or something?
113.
Oh, it's only 113.
Yeah,
That's only.
Yeah, it's not fully funded
it's
yet,
not fully funded
It's
yet.
only 113.
After what we did last year, it's up at 190 something.
That's what I thought. 200 was always the goal back in 2004 when we passed it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, this is cash balances of 6/30/22, so if money was put into the corpus as of July 1st, then that would not be reflected.
So what is that balance again?
This was as of 6/30 of 2022, so if you had appropriated funds effective July 1st, then this balance doesn't
I'll
reflect
dig that up over lunch.
Sorry about
Okay,
that.
thank you.
It still didn't bring it to the full 200 million.
Right. No, but that's,
It's close.
then
Mr.
if you
Chairman,
did a 5% spend on that, it's 10 million a year, and you'd need what? How, times 5 reserve account, so, but it's all doable, is what I'm saying. Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it was 260 as of June 30, 260 million was the Pool A balance.
No, that's.
Total Pool A.
No, he just-
Oh, I'm sorry.
How much of that is Wildlife Trust?
Oh, I thought you were talking about the entire pool of the reserve.
It's 190 something.
Mr. Chairman, I think,
What's that?
you know, there'd be a possibility if you could convince all of the cats and herd them into one room that you could do a 5% spending policy across all of them. But I think that would be really hard to do, to pick one out and do that, and then try to pick another one out. So I guess I'd suggest that if you're going to try to do that, look at doing the same thing as far as aggregating a reserve on this, like we're doing the total return, and do it that way, and see whether or not you can make it fly. But I don't think you'll get it done this year. I think you're going to need an interim to actually go through and convince all the cats that this is the best dish of milk. Yeah. Yep.
One more time, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. That is not me. Okay. That total balance in Amendment A is how much to?
260.
Mr. Chairman, that was the market value. Don pointed out I had the market value on it. The investment, the cash balance, the market value on it is current market value instead of cost basis was
336.5 million, but that's the total Pool A.
How much of that is the Wildlife Trust Fund?
So, Mr. Chairman, again, my numbers were as of June 30th, 113.3 million. And so I believe,
We had a 90 million or 75.
okay, so if you added 75, it would not be reflected, because remember, this is June 30th, so apologize.
Mr. Chairman, the current balance in Wildlife Trust as of literally right now, this second, is 188 million.
And all of that is in Pool A?
Yes.
Gotcha.
So half of Pool A essentially is the Wildlife Trust Fund.
Yeah. A little more.
And Mr. Chairman, if you would like, I do have those balances for WildStar as well. WildStar 1 currently has 810 million, and WildStar 2 has roughly 260 million currently.
Very good.
Question.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, how many different governmental entities have invested in WildStar 1 and 2?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, a ton. It's not a great number to
Is
say.
that so that's an actual number. Got it. That's plenty.
A ton. No, Mr. Chairman and Representative Schwartz, quite a few, actually. We have a lot of participants. We end up having a lot of, like, City of Cheyenne might have 3 different types of programs though. And so they might have the fire and the water and the things like that. So those all constitute their own account. So as far as like municipality in general versus accounts in general, I mean, it definitely can spiderweb from that. But a lot of the municipalities do participate in the WildStar 1 program. And WildStar 2 is rapidly growing.
But it can also, it's not just towns and counties. It can be hospital districts,
Districts.
any other governmental entity, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, yes, absolutely.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that information would be interesting to the Appropriations Committee if we could get that printout from the Treasurer's Office of who those participants are and how much they have invested.
And how many checks they wrote?
Yeah.
Well, I think they can take care of that through rules. That's something we don't need to mess with. Just thinking when we have this discussion of local government distributions might be an interesting conversation.
How many need to come to that meeting?
That's right. Okay, further questions for? So, I'm just curious. We get these monthly kind of updates of the progress of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I'm wondering, and we're talking about the confidence interval between this. I think it would be useful to have us, or some of us who are interested, come to your office and sit down with, so we can actually see what's going on and understand what, the various software programs that you're incorporating and the assistance that you're receiving, just so we kind of can, touch it, feel it, understand it, and the progress that's being made. And I just think it would be a useful thing for us to do.
Mr. Chairman, that's interesting, like a demo day, maybe.
Yeah.
Some kind of like that. And we can sure think about that, brainstorm and put something together. Would you like to do something? I know you're very busy. This is a different committee though. Would you like to do that during the session, over a lunchtime? When do you think we should maybe try to put that together?
I
Do you have
think
a suggestion?
JAC could do it over the lunch hour.
JAC?
During December.
Okay, and maybe invite all of the members
Just say
Okay.
whoever wants to be there.
of the because select cap finance as well.
I mean, most of these people will be involved in that
Okay,
in one fashion or another.
okay, we'll do some brainstorming, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, further questions?
Mr.
right.
Chairman, Representative Schwartz, really quick, just wanted to add, so 193 participants are in WildStar 1 and 37 are in WildStar 2.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Anything else? Any public comment on the treasurer's discussions? Seeing none, we'll close public comment on that. It's 12 o'clock, so walk us through the afternoon before we leave. What do we need to do?
Mr. Chairman, the Treasurer's Office has already provided part of our discussion about impediments to investment in that they gave the Pool A discussion about their update with talking with shareholders. So really probably the next thing is to talk about 23 LSO 181. That's the funding of the reserve accounts.
Okay, and so we'll start off on that. It looks like we're set up to have an hour and a half lunch. Is everyone still good with that? Okay, well, so we'll reconvene at 1:30.
As long as we will stay till 8.